Sup, my fellas. Don't forget to leave feedback, and enjoy the story. Humanity finally snatched victory from the abode of evil, Pandemonium. They smashed to pieces the 6 great demons who had tried to destroy this world. Even the god of the ruined sea fell, but humanity's triumph came at a high price. Everything had already vanished from the surface of the earth. Lee Se-hun stood amid the ruins, but felt victory as defeat. The sea still raged, and the last blacksmith only laughed hysterically. His companions were furious at him for behaving so vilely, and pretending to be a hero. But MC reminded them that without his equipment, they would have died long ago. In truth, Lee Se-hun considered them dogs, who did not protect humanity, but followed their own whims, dreaming only of profit. Ultimately, they made the greatest contribution, for they survived until the very end of the carnage. Just before his death, MC decided to squeeze the last drops of mana and use his special skill, Bondsmith, to extract precious ores from the fighters. A final swing of the hammer, a final weapon crafted. And so Lee Se-hun committed suicide, awakening the spiritual form of the equipment. Suddenly, a bright light flashed before his eyes, time rolled back 31 years, and the blacksmith found himself at his entrance exam. He immediately connects the regression to the imagery manifestation he saw before death. He suspects return to origin came from the weapon forged with his own bond stone. When warned to focus or be expelled, he outwardly complies while inwardly confirming what has happened. Touching his hammer, he accepts that he has truly regressed. He asks himself whether earlier knowledge and earlier forging can change everything this time. His answer is that changing everything is not the point. What matters is seizing the chance he has been given right now. A small smile forms as his resolve hardens. He vows that in this life he will protect everything. His first step will be passing the Babel exam. He reminds himself that meeting the 3 dogs again is only the beginning. His focused forging soon catches the attention of the supervising professor. The professor senses something unusual about this candidate. Watching the hammer strikes, he notices a flawless rhythm and resonance. He recognizes the work as astonishingly refined. To him, Se-hun is already displaying top-tier forging skill. The entire workshop begins to notice the candidate working with unnatural composure. As the blade takes shape, onlookers are stunned by the perfection of its finish. Even the proctor is shocked that Se-hun produced something like that. The professor quietly concludes that an extraordinary candidate has appeared. He even thinks Se-hun could pass immediately if he simply submitted the weapon as it is. Instead, Se-hun suddenly shatters the blade, shocking both the proctor and the professor. He admits to himself that he still has far to go, and refuses to show off something he considers trash. As a blacksmith, he cannot tolerate submitting a weapon beneath his standards. The proctor explodes in outrage, but Se-hun calmly asks to remake the assignment. The professor is startled by the request. When the proctor tries to stop him, Se-hun addresses him without backing down. The professor orders the remaining materials to be brought to Se-hun. He points out that no rule was actually broken and pressures the proctor into obeying. The proctor reluctantly rushes to fetch the materials while Se-hun waits in silence. Then the professor approaches Se-hun directly, testing his resolve. He reminds Se-hun that only 40 minutes remain, and Se-hun answers without hesitation. The professor presses him on whether destroying the first weapon was truly the right decision. Se-hun pauses, remembering the future that taught him what a real weapon should be. He answers that he cannot submit something like that. After considering the conviction behind those words, the professor allows him to continue. Se-hun's eyes sharpen as he shifts from resolve to execution. He judges his younger body lacking for perfect forging, with mana, strength, and time all limited. So he searches for the best possible method under those constraints. A strange noise from the furnaces gives him the answer. He realizes he can infuse mana into the ignition stones, though others panic because doing so should make them explode. Ignoring the warnings, he orders everyone to hurry and stay back. The other candidates can only stare, as he does something they consider insane. Instead of exploding, the furnace erupts into a controlled storm of 5-colored flames around him. The workshop breaks into chaos, convinced a fire disaster has begun. But the professor stops them from interfering and insists they simply watch. He tells the proctor to observe the flow of the flames carefully. Se-hun stands before the furnace as if commanding the fire itself. He has created the 5-color fire demon, a high-temperature flame amplified by the resonance of 5 ignition stones. By controlling mana with precision, he turns minimal power into an exceptional forging technique. The others are stunned when the furnace remains stable instead of exploding. Then they notice the iron ingot itself changing color inside the flames. The professor understands that Se-hun is using the resonating ignition stones to alter the ingot's properties while boosting the fire. He realizes this will drastically shorten the forging time, though the exam clock is still unforgiving. Even so, he doubts Se-hun can finish in time if this is all he has. Se-hun keeps hammering the transformed ingot despite that doubt. The metal begins to break apart and reform under the force of his strikes. Seeing the change, Se-hun smiles as if the process is finally going his way. He grips the heated metal with tongs and draws it back into the 5-colored fire for the next stage. The reforging truly begins as he feeds the altered blade into the rainbow furnace to create something worthy this time. Lee Se-hun forces himself to keep forging despite his body already nearing its limit. He drives the work forward with brute persistence as the unfinished weapon nears its final stage. When the last protection around him fails, the strain finally starts injuring him directly. Realizing he has exhausted both mana and stamina, he bitterly accepts how weak his current body is and vows to train after the exam. Even so, he refuses to stop and tightens his grip on the task. He decides that finishing the exam matters more than the pain he is enduring. Pushing himself past his physical limit, he lands the decisive final strike. As the remaining time rapidly counts down, he keeps working without hesitation. With only moments left, he completes the last refinement on the blade. At the final second, he halts and presents the finished weapon. Only after stopping does he let himself breathe. His battered hand trembles from the effort he just forced through. The system confirms that he has completed the Armament 5-color fire blade and gained the skill Artisan of Flame. The weapon is judged high rank, and its description reveals a mana-reactive blade whose flames change color and properties with the user's mana. The result shocks the other examinees, who had expected nothing more than a simple pass. Sehun calmly points out that they should read the full evaluation before judging it. One loudmouthed student erupts at the unexpected result until he is immediately shut down. The outburst collapses into a meek apology. After the exam, Sehun is summoned to Professor Kim In-cheol's office. Kim studies him in silence, weighing the meaning of what Sehun has produced. He asks directly whether this sword is truly worthy of submission. Sehun answers that it is acceptable for now, but his tone makes clear he still aims higher. Kim notices that dissatisfaction and decides to speak frankly. He warns Sehun that Babel's refining department will not meet his standards and advises him to withdraw. Kim explains that Babel's name is impressive, but its refining department has been failing to produce meaningful results. Sehun is unmoved because this decline is something he already knows. He recalls that Babel's refining department is destined to shut down within 8 years as its standards continue to fall. He also knows that Vulcan Academy will eventually rise to become the world's top school for blacksmiths. So when Kim suggests Vulcan may become the better choice, Sehun cuts him off. He declares that the best school will not be Vulcan but Babel, because that is where he intends to enroll. Kim is caught off guard by the certainty behind that claim. Instead of dismissing him, he begins to reconsider the boy in front of him. Kim tells him that if he truly means to change Babel, he must first become the department valedictorian, and Sehun answers with absolute confidence. Kim then tests whether Sehun even understands what that title really means at Babel. Sehun accurately explains that the top 2 students in a department face an additional exam to decide the valedictorian candidate. The explanation broadens into Babel's structure, where cadets are divided into 3 major departments. Those departments are combat, support, and technology. Within each department, many specialized majors branch out beneath them. Becoming a department valedictorian means standing above all those majors and being recognized across Babel as elite talent. Kim falls silent, realizing Sehun understands the weight of what he is demanding. He warns him again, this time not as a professor but as an experienced blacksmith. Even if Sehun reaches the top of the department, Kim believes Babel still cannot give him the future he deserves and urges him toward Vulcan instead. He insists that Vulcan is the path best suited for Sehun. Sehun recognizes that Kim is sacrificing his own department's interests out of genuine concern and respects him for it. Still, he rejects the idea that environment alone decides greatness. He states with conviction that Babel itself will soon become the best because he is choosing it. Kim is struck by the audacity of a boy who speaks as if his own rise will transform the institution. What should sound like arrogance instead feels strangely persuasive to him. Accepting that resolve, Kim offers his hand and says he looks forward to working with Sehun. Sehun takes the handshake, sealing their understanding. The system records that a bond with Kim In-cheol has been established at level 1. Sehun immediately uses that new bond to extract something valuable from Kim. A fragment of materialized bond energy forms in his hand. It becomes flame-bearing iron, a high-grade bond ore that stores fire internally despite wood-like properties. Checking his status, Sehun admits that compared with Babel freshmen, his current stats are still miserable. Even so, he accepts those shortcomings as a cheap price for having returned to the past. He reins in his impatience, and reminds himself not to become greedy too soon. His real goal remains the future war against the monsters of Pandemonium. Back in his room, the city outside is quiet while he plans his next move. He studies the newly extracted bond ore and considers how useful it might become. He judges the ore decent, though smaller than he would like. He reflects that bond extraction turns relationships into otherwise non-existent ores. The problem is that his bond level is still too low to draw out much from anyone yet. His thoughts return to Pandemonium, the force that will one day threaten the entire planet. He remembers that humanity's destruction by the 6 great demon gods was not an accident but their deliberate design. To stop that future, he decides he cannot afford sentimentality and must first secure tools or skills that preserve crucial memories. With Babel enrollment settled, he marks the first step of his larger plan as complete. As he considers the next step, the system suddenly reacts. A new notification catches him completely off guard. His bond level with himself reaches level 1, unlocking the skill bond imprint. 1 week later, Sehun arrives at Babel Academy for the additional exam. He gets lost on the way and grumbles his way through the halls until he finally finds the right room. He reaches refining room 3 just in time. As he enters, someone formally calls him by name before he can even finish greeting the room. Inside, he finds the exam already assembled and realizes the atmosphere is more serious than expected. One of the waiting cadets immediately needles him for looking too relaxed. That speaker is revealed to be Hans Barmet, the vice dean of Borsippa's son. Kim notes that the exam has not started yet, but the vice dean makes clear that the issue is Sehun's attitude, not his timing. He decides Sehun needs a warning before the exam begins. Sehun realizes that Kim's department is not only struggling academically but also politically isolated from the higher-ups. That makes Kim's earlier recommendation to leave Babel make even more sense. Sehun studies Hans and senses hostility before a word is even exchanged. Hans returns the look with open contempt. Sehun stays outwardly calm while measuring his opponent. He greets Hans politely, which only throws the other boy off for a moment. Privately, Sehun is amused by how absurdly arrogant Hans already is. Another presence enters, and the room's tension shifts immediately. Sehun and Hans both turn toward the newcomer. The vice dean addresses the arrival as dean, confirming someone even more important has come. Sehun is stunned when he recognizes who it is. The sight triggers a memory of a woman sitting alone in a ruined, rain-soaked future. The present reveals her as Dean Ryu Unha of Babel's Borsippa department. Sehun can barely hide his shock at seeing her here. He remembers her future identity as the S-rank hero weapon eater, a monster of a fighter who grows stronger by devouring armaments. Before his regression, she had only been one of his long-term customers, not someone this close to him. That memory deepens into a ruined future where she was left battered and alone. He recalls her bitter regret over having consumed one of his armaments. In that memory, she had looked up to find him standing before her in the rain. She had been too broken even to meet his eyes properly. He had faced her with grim resolve rather than blame. The memory lingers as the two of them stood amid devastation. Her weak recognition of him pulls Sehun back to the present. He snaps out of the memory when his name is called. Dean Ryu begins the formal explanation of the exam. Kim states that the total exam time will be 90 minutes. Within that time, the two candidates must create an armament that can pair with the sword from the previous exam. There is one major restriction that changes the entire challenge. They are forbidden from ordinary forging and may use only alchemy smithing. Kim then presents the available ores for the test. The candidates are told they may freely choose from any of the materials provided. Their creations will be judged by Dean Ryu Unha and Vice Dean Barmet, so the exam is both technical and political. With the rules set, Kim officially starts the test. Hans and Sehun immediately lock into a silent rivalry as the exam begins. Sehun prepares himself and quickly starts analyzing the constraints of alchemy smithing. He knows he must create resonance using only pure mana so the elemental mana in the materials does not run wild. Before he can act, Hans mocks him for hesitating in front of the ores. Sehun dryly asks whether that insult could possibly have been aimed at anyone else. Hans is called to order by his father before the exchange can escalate. Michael Barmet warns him to stop making comments unrelated to the exam. Hans backs down, and Sehun suddenly realizes the judge is literally his opponent's father. The family resemblance between Michael and Hans makes the situation painfully obvious. Sehun concludes that Hans has already figured out he knows the truth. Hans smugly confirms that he is fully aware of the advantage his lineage gives him. He contrasts Sehun's poor background and low mana with his own prestigious family and overwhelming mana reserves. As he selects high-grade blue ores, Hans becomes convinced the result is already decided. He believes victory is guaranteed before the real contest has even begun. The judges identify his choices as lazurite and Hainam jade, both rich in mana and aligned with water. Kim points out that water-attributed mana is normally difficult to smith because it reacts poorly with fire. Michael dismisses that concern, insisting modern alchemy smithing has already overcome such limitations. Kim counters that even with those advances, synthesis speed still depends heavily on the caster and ore, and in this setup 30 minutes is the key threshold. Michael's expression shifts as he realizes what Hans is about to demonstrate. He reveals that Hans can synthesize any ore within 30 minutes. When Hans begins resonance synthesis on the spot, Kim is stunned because that level far exceeds ordinary entrance. The feat proves Hans is operating above second-year standards, making the exam's bias impossible to ignore. Kim immediately understands that the chosen format was designed to favor Hans from the start. He inwardly curses Michael for rigging the contest through the exam conditions. At the same time, Dean Ryu quietly finishes her own assessment of the situation. Sehun finally makes his move by selecting Hydrate and Crimson Firestone instead. The judges are startled because he has chosen an even more volatile combination. Michael notes that Sehun has picked fire-attributed counterparts to Hans's high-mana ores and assumes it is reckless pride. Hans watches in silence, trying to understand Sehun's intent. He realizes Sehun deliberately chose materials that directly oppose his own. Confident Sehun lacks the mana to control Crimson Firestone, Hans dismisses him as a fool. He starts to relax, thinking the match will be easier than expected. That confidence shatters the moment something unexpected ignites around Sehun. Sehun activates the newly unlocked skill Bond imprint. The skill lets him wear bond stones, and he immediately triggers the imprint called Harmony. He equips flame-bearing iron to his right arm, turning the bond ore into usable power. A concentrated flame manifests in his grasp. As fire coils around his arm, Sehun smiles, ready to overturn the exam that was meant to crush him. As the exam continues, the blonde student realizes his rival is resorting to an unconventional shortcut. Lee Sehun begins forcing fire mana directly through the materials instead of following the standard process. With a confident grin, he drives the fire attribute into the ore and weapon parts at once. The heated minerals start resonating under his control as he pushes the synthesis faster. He commits fully to the risky method, convinced he can finish before anyone stops him. From the judge's side, both examinees are seen working at the same time, one with fire and one with lightning. The blonde student dismisses Sehun's approach as foolish because elemental minerals should normally be resonated with pure mana first. He expects that forcing elemental mana into them will eventually make the energy run wild. Certain that Sehun is about to cause an accident, he looks on with contempt. The fire mana suddenly surges out of control and scorches Sehun's arm. Even while injured, Sehun keeps the process going instead of abandoning the attempt. The judges are stunned by how much raw firepower he is producing despite the backlash. The materials finally converge around the sword's sheath as the synthesis reaches completion. Sehun lets out a small breath, knowing he has pulled it off. A system notice confirms that the original flame-bearing iron has been processed into a new armament called fire-accumulating sheath. The red-haired dean and the older professor are left speechless by the result. Even the blonde examinee can only stare, shaken by what he just witnessed. He can hardly believe Sehun actually succeeded with a method that should have failed. The crafted sheath is identified as a rare-grade scabbard that stores and amplifies fire mana and grants access to the skill Wildfire. The blonde student is further rattled by how quickly Sehun finished the synthesis. He insists to himself that this outcome should have been impossible because elemental mana normally goes berserk in such cases. Trying to reassure himself, he resumes his own lightning work and wonders if he misunderstood the theory. Then he notices too late that his own process is heading toward disaster. He shouts for the procedure to stop, realizing elemental mana stones are being infused the wrong way. Before he can recover, a sphere of unstable lightning forms in front of him. The danger becomes immediate as the energy swells past control. The chamber ruptures under the strain. A violent explosion tears through the exam hall. Later that afternoon, the aftermath of the refining department exam becomes the subject of official review. The floor is left scattered with shattered blue crystals and burn marks from the blast. The blonde student, Hans, stands injured and shaken among the debris. Sehun reflects that under normal circumstances one of the two finalists would have been recommended as department valedictorian. The older professor laments that the exam should have produced a clear top candidate, but he immediately adds that the situation has become complicated. Hans clutches his damaged arm, already sensing the results slipping away. The professor notes, bitterly, that the contest may now end in a forfeit instead of a proper decision. Another examiner prepares to make the ruling official. Because a student was injured during the exam, one side argues that the test should be voided and rescheduled. The older professor rejects that idea, blaming the accident on Hans's own carelessness and insisting the completed exam still stands. Sehun's blonde rival tries to turn the discussion moral by accusing Professor Kim of caring more about results than student safety. Professor Kim remains unmoved by the attempt to shift blame. The blonde professor rises and points out that the fastest officially recognized resonance time in academia is 5 minutes. He uses that record to frame Sehun's feat as suspicious rather than impressive. He argues that a freshman who had only just awakened mana could not possibly activate it and achieve resonance almost simultaneously. Sehun finally answers by explaining that alchemy smithing was created for forging armaments with mana alone when ordinary smithing was impossible. He says the true goal of alchemy smithing is not to kill the ore and replace it with the smith's life, as in traditional methods. Its essence is to find the root of the mineral core and unfold the life already sleeping inside the ore. Sehun states that this is exactly what he accomplished, and that the academy itself will eventually discover the same answer through trial and error. He sees no reason to explain that future standard to an arrogant old man who refuses to listen, though the professor pretends not to understand him. Unable to refute the explanation, the blonde professor falls back on accusing Sehun of fraud. He argues that a poor freshman producing a rare-grade armament is so implausible that it must be cheating. Sehun is baffled by how shamelessly the accusation is being made. The professor openly admits the result makes no sense to him and treats that ignorance as proof of wrongdoing. He presses the dean to disqualify Lee Sehun for fraud and hold a re-examination instead. The dean watches in silence, weighing the room before responding. When she rises, the others realize her decision is about to settle the matter. She personally inspects the fire-accumulating sheath instead of relying on the accusations. Holding the finished armament, she quietly repeats that it makes no sense. Yet her tone suggests not dismissal, but recognition of something extraordinary. She calls Sehun forward to hear her judgment directly. Then, in a sudden comic break, she demands the right to lick the armament once before anyone else touches it. The blonde professor is left utterly confused by the bizarre request. The older professor can only repeat the absurdity back in disbelief. The room collectively freezes at the dean's shameless enthusiasm. Everyone is too stunned to react while she guards the armament like treasure. Later that afternoon in the city, Sehun leaves the academy still thinking about the exam. He walks through downtown carrying his jacket and replaying the confrontation in his head. He judges that the sheath still lacks proper fine-tuning and is far from the complete form he intended. Even so, one part of the day still amuses him. He privately laughs at how furious Vice-Dean Barmett became when his authority was challenged, drawing wary looks from passers-by. Then the name Barmett suddenly catches in his memory. As he repeats it to himself, he finally connects the Vice-Dean to a much darker past. He remembers a victim from Babel who said the cheap armaments Barmett forced people to buy had exploded without warning. Those defective goods had left Louise Vallant permanently scarred with mana burns, and Barmett had been responsible. Sehun's expression hardens as the memory settles into certainty. He stops walking, no longer treating the Vice-Dean as a mere nuisance. He realizes Hans Barmett is the very blacksmith whose greed ruined one of the people he once meant to save. Sehun had planned to quickly find and rehabilitate the 3 dogs from his past life, but now he sees one of them may not need saving at all. A cold smile spreads across his face as his priorities shift. If he crushes Hans Barmett before he can go astray, then one future tragedy can be erased at its source. Elsewhere, in the Borsippa department conference room, the dean's next move shocks the faculty. Professors from other departments are stunned when she proposes making Lee Sehun the department valedictorian. The dean asks plainly whether anyone dares object. One professor cautiously says his concern is less an objection than advice. The blonde professor seizes the opening and reminds the dean that she has not held office long. She answers only with a cold stare, refusing to be intimidated. The room murmurs that Sehun's armament was impressive, but some still want closer review before granting him the title. Professor Kim counters that anyone who saw the fire-accumulating sheath properly would understand its value, especially in how it channels mana and complements the 5-color fire blade. Another professor remains uncertain and questions how complete the armament truly is. The dean answers that the sheath is probably under 60% of Sehun's intended design, and that this very incompleteness proves how much potential it has. She makes clear that her judgment is based on insight, not impulse. Then she declares that if the faculty still cannot accept Sehun's valedictorian demonstration after seeing this much, they are free to reject her decision. She raises the stakes by vowing to resign as dean if her judgment is wrong. The story then shifts to a broader history, beginning with the Tower of Heroes descending from the heavens 54 years earlier to accelerate humanity's evolution. In response, the underground released the Swamp of Pandemonium, a corrupting force that birthed a catastrophe alongside humanity's new opportunities. Babel Academy arose within that era as the greatest school in history, built in the middle of the Pacific and devoted to producing heroes. At Babel, the Ascension Emperor Ludwig Schubert personally welcomed the new generation and promised they too could become heroes. He urged the students to move forward and accept the burden placed on those who reached Babel. He defined their duty plainly as the duty of heroes. The legendary figure is identified as Ludwig Schubert, the Ascension Emperor. Watching him in memory, Sehun reflects that Ludwig appears kind, even if he was never entirely a good old man. The ceremony proceeds to the valedictorian demonstrations for the year's top entrants. The department valedictorians are called to the stage to display their abilities. Sehun thinks about how Academy honors once inflated so many egos in his previous life, and begins to understand why. The demonstrations begin with the combat department. Seeing the atmosphere and prestige around the event, Sehun realizes how much pressure it places on whoever performs next. The announcer dramatically introduces the item for the first demonstration. A humanoid golem powers on with a red sensor glare. It is revealed to be Automaton Model 9 from the Marionette Factory, a combat golem strong enough to spar with a C-rank hero. Sehun immediately wonders whether a machine like that fights with martial arts rather than weapons. The announcer names the combat department's representative as Jake Myers. Jake Myers, valedictorian of Akarkuf, steps forward with easy confidence. He takes his place in the arena opposite the automaton as the crowd watches. Sehun recognizes Jake as the third son of the Myers family, a swordsman lineage, and recalls hearing that he preferred martial arts instead. Jake settles into a fighting stance, ready to prove that rumor true. The automaton locks onto him and prepares to attack. At the signal, the match begins immediately. The machine launches first with explosive speed. It dives at Jake with a lethal beam-like strike aimed straight through him. Jake slips past the first attack by a hair, forcing the automaton to overshoot. More slashing charges follow in rapid succession, but he threads through them all without losing balance. He skids low across the floor, using the machine's momentum against it. A grin spreads across his face as he sees the opening and takes the initiative. Jake closes the distance in a single burst and drives in with a bare-handed strike. He commits fully, putting all his force into one decisive blow. His punch lands squarely and launches the automaton backward. The spectators jolt upright at the sheer impact. Jake follows with another crushing hit before the machine can recover. Sehun is startled, because in his previous life Jake was supposed to have died young as only an A-rank hero. Watching Jake's overwhelming talent, Sehun realizes he is seeing a once-in-a-decade prodigy who should have gone much farther. That contradiction leaves Sehun wondering what derailed Jake's future in the timeline he remembers. Jake gathers himself for the finishing move. He smashes through the automaton's defense and tears it apart with one final explosive strike. The shattered head and core spin away across the arena. The ruined remains crash to the ground, ending the fight outright. Jake casually wipes his brow and jokes that it has been a while since he had to loosen up that much. The announcer scrambles to recover from the shock of how quickly it ended. He praises Jake for subduing a C-rank level automaton in a single breath, and the crowd is left stunned. Jake basks in the acclaim as the combat department's reputation is reaffirmed. Sehun admits the opening act has raised the bar and piled pressure onto whoever follows. The announcer moves on to the support department and calls up its valedictorian, Inoue Erika. Sehun recognizes the name at once and realizes she is the support department's top student, so pressure will not faze her. He remembers Erika Inoue as the eldest daughter of one of Japan's 3 great families, a future S-rank hero who wielded a myth-grade armament. But he also remembers that she was eventually corrupted into a maiden and subdued by her own family. Because of that doomed future, Sehun had never planned to get close to her. Then Erika unexpectedly glances in his direction. Sehun is caught off guard and wonders whether she just looks straight at him. Her demonstration begins against a more heavily armored Model 9 with roughly 1.5 times the previous defense. The announcer hypes the challenge and asks what kind of performance Erika will show against it. Erika answers by calmly lifting a birdcage that contains a black crow with a glowing blue eye, revealing that her demonstration will rely on something far stranger than brute force. A black-haired cadet calmly calls forth a crow-like familiar, revealing a power that feels far more dangerous than her quiet demeanor suggests. She steps into the arena with a birdcage in hand as her summoned crow launches toward the target. The enormous crow descends over the arena, dwarfing both the girl and the defensive automaton set up for the test. Lee Sehun, watching from the stands, realizes her weapon is simply a crow. The automaton tracks the bird and braces for impact. It raises its shield and commits fully to defense. Sehun judges that breaking through will be difficult, especially against a defense-specialized machine. The girl quietly gives her command. The crow folds into a sharper, faster form as it dives. Its body reveals itself as an armored weapon beast rather than an ordinary summon. Its eye flares with killing intent as the attack locks in. The transformed crow aligns itself like a spear and commits to a straight piercing strike. It accelerates in a single decisive plunge. The impact tears straight through the automaton's defense and detonates through its body while the girl remains unmoved. Sehun is caught off guard by how completely the supposedly safe target was overwhelmed. A hole opens through the automaton's chest as its systems begin to fail. The machine staggers upright for a moment, already ruined from within. It collapses, ending the match almost instantly. The crow returns to perch on the girl's hand as if nothing extraordinary just happened. The crowd erupts, praising Erika for dropping a defense-enhanced C-rank level automaton with a single strike. Sehun realizes that after displays like Erika's, a simple weapon reveal from him would look unimpressive. The announcer moves on to the technology department's valedictorian, Cadet Lee Sehun. As the next demonstration begins, the supervising elder Ludwig Schubert watches in silence. Ludwig notes that this year's new valedictorians are unusually strong, while others worry that a rare refining department valedictorian may be under too much pressure. Dean Ryu Unha dismisses the concern and shows confidence that Sehun will be fine. The audience wonders whether Sehun can possibly top the shocking performances that came before him. Instead of making a flashy entrance, Sehun simply draws his sword. He stands in the arena with a plain-looking blade and sheath, offering little immediate spectacle. A display identifies his work as the 5-color fire blade and the fire-accumulating sheath, revealing that the sheath is rare grade despite coming from the refining department. The spectators are impressed by the rarity, but quickly judge the set as lacking impact compared with the earlier demonstrations. Some dismiss his chances, while one ambitious observer privately celebrates what he thinks will be Sehun's failure. That man convinces himself Sehun's weak showing will help him seize greater power within Borsippa. Ryu Unha watches closely, saying nothing. When the announcer introduces a D-rank level target, Sehun interrupts and asks for something stronger instead. He specifically requests model number 8 and asks that it be equipped with armor. The announcer is left baffled by the demand. He explains that Model 8 can already endure attacks from B-rank heroes in some cases, making Sehun's request sound absurd. The announcer protests that such a setup cannot be prepared on short notice and accuses Sehun of derailing the demonstration. A calm voice cuts in and reveals that the requested setup had already been prepared. The armored automaton is brought out immediately. Its arrival confirms that Sehun's impossible request was anticipated in advance. Even the announcer is shaken as the fully armored Model 8 is positioned against Sehun. The supervising artisan studies Sehun in silence, measuring him. Then he decides to allow the boy complete freedom. With that approval, Sehun is told to go all out. The announcer gives up trying to make sense of the situation and starts the match anyway. The battle officially begins. The supervising artisan watches with folded arms, expecting something worth seeing. Ryu Unha also fixes her attention on Sehun. Sehun accepts the challenge and prepares to answer the expectation placed on him. He decides to prove himself properly rather than hold back. He activates the sword and sheath together, drawing out violently clashing multicolored flames. The unstable fire coils around him as he advances toward the armored automaton. The spectacle finally wins over the crowd, who begin to realize this demonstration may be far more dangerous than expected. Not everyone is convinced, and some still dismiss it as empty showmanship. Sehun knows the real problem is not appearance but the fact that he lacks the mana needed to control such a weapon safely. He recalls that the 5-color fire blade's flames naturally clash and can injure the user unless controlled with great mana. To overcome that flaw, he uses Artisan of Flame to inject crimson fire into the fire-accumulating sheath and store the unstable flames inside it. Once the storage process is complete, he steadies himself for the real attack. The automaton raises a hexagonal barrier and braces for the incoming strike. Sehun triggers Wildfire, the sheath's armament skill. He swings with everything committed to a single release. Wildfire detonates all the mana compressed inside the sheath at once. Sehun understands that if he unleashes the forcibly compressed 5-colored flames in this state, they will erupt together. He deliberately forces that total explosion into the target. The spectators are left speechless by the scale of the blast. Even the announcer can only stare, unable to understand what Sehun just did. When the smoke clears, Sehun walks forward through the aftermath still standing. He quietly resheathes his blade, signaling that the fight is already over. Only then does he let himself breathe, relieved that he survived his own technique. Looking at the massive trench carved across the arena, he worries he may have gone too far. The announcer finally finds his voice again. The damage is so severe that repair crews are summoned at once, and the valedictorian demonstration midterm is brought to an abrupt end. Later, Ryu Unha heads to meet Sehun in private. She finds him waiting tensely, expecting trouble. When she arrives, she apologizes for being late because she was helping deal with the ruined arena. Sehun immediately apologizes instead, assuming he has been called in to answer for the destruction. Ryu Unha is confused that he thinks this is about punishment. He awkwardly asks whether she summoned him just to scold him. She denies that and tries to explain her real reason for calling him. Before she can say it properly, her composure slips and her hunger-like fixation surfaces. Sehun can only stare as she seems to growl at him. Embarrassed, she forces herself to recover and restate her intent. She offers to pay 10 times market price. What she actually wants is to buy the 5-color fire blade and fire-accumulating sheath from him. Sehun is stunned, and at that moment his system announces that a bond has been established with Ryu Unha. As she praises the armaments, the system confirms both the new bond and that her bond with him has already reached level 1. Sehun is shocked that the bond formed so quickly, far earlier than he remembers from before his regression. He thanks her outwardly while inwardly recognizing this as a valuable opportunity. He secretly activates bond extraction through physical contact. Blue energy surges between them as he extracts something directly from Ryu Unha's bond. The result is Gluttony Iron, a supreme-grade high-level bond material that devours iron to generate heat and create mineral blood. Ryu Unha, still focused on the sale, asks whether he is agreeing to sell. Before he can answer properly, a call from Kim Incheol interrupts with urgent news from the Academy head. The supervising artisan arrives in person to say the Academy head will begin the presentation ceremony immediately. Ryu Unha asks to take Sehun with her. Permission is granted without resistance. Sehun leaves politely, promising to meet her again later. Left alone, Ryu Unha is frustrated that the conversation ended before she secured the weapons. The story shifts to the heart of Babel Academy, the old main building known as Marduk Mansion. Sehun is led through its grand halls toward the Academy head. On the way, he is warned to show proper respect because the Academy head has already been lenient about the arena incident. He is reminded that the man he is about to meet stands on an entirely different level from ordinary people. Sehun answers calmly, showing no fear. From behind a great desk, the Academy head acknowledges him. He is introduced as Ludwig, the Ascension Emperor and head of the Academy. Sehun remembers that before the regression Ludwig died alone fighting one of the 6 great demon gods, making him one of humanity's greatest heroes. That memory hardens Sehun's respect for the man before him. Ludwig says the armaments Sehun displayed today were all intriguing. He admits there were some regrets in the demonstration, but says his expectations for Sehun remain high. Sehun immediately understands the criticism. He should have destroyed those weapons rather than let others covet them. Instead of dwelling on that, Ludwig decides to reward Sehun's talent and effort with 2 prizes. He tells Sehun to ask for what he needs. Sehun requests rewards that will increase both his mana and his memory capacity. Ludwig responds by summoning suitable items himself. A radiant golden relic appears first. Then 2 rare materials are presented: heavy ink rock, which absorbs mana and swallows all but darkness, and dream ivory, which can touch the boundary between dreams and reality. Sehun is astonished because both materials are extremely hard to obtain, especially dream ivory. He quickly regains his composure and realizes he already knows how to make use of them. Ludwig asks whether the rewards satisfy him. Sehun answers honestly that they are exactly what he needed. As Sehun leaves, another observer questions Ludwig's decision to grant him 2 rewards. The floating golden relic reacts as if echoing that doubt. Ludwig dismisses the concern, saying he gave those rewards simply because the boy has the capacity to handle them. When someone remarks that Sehun felt strangely deep for his age, Ludwig says that only proves how much depth the boy truly has. He adds one more thought, implying there is still something about Sehun even he cannot fully read. Ludwig concludes that Sehun possesses a depth beyond even his own understanding. The next day begins under a bright sky at the Academy. Sehun enters class while the other cadets settle in. Nearby, Hans casually tells a blonde upperclassman that he already has lunch plans with Senior Howard. That revelation shocks the others because Howard is the third-year valedictorian of Borsippa. Hans proudly explains that their families are close and that Howard has agreed to advise him on academy life. Sehun arrives at the doorway just as the conversation is turning into bragging. His gaze sharpens at once. The room falls silent as his presence cuts through the chatter. For a brief moment, his eyes become unnervingly intense. The blonde cadet is rattled by that look and instinctively recoils. Sehun notices the reaction and decides the boy has understood his place for now. The blonde cadet swallows his resentment and keeps his anger to himself. Before anything can escalate, the instructor enters and orders everyone to sit. Kim In-cheol takes the podium and begins the first class. He announces that instead of ordinary introductions, the first lesson will begin with a practical demonstration. He presents a special material called projection alloy. He explains that it is dozens of times more mana-sensitive than common ore and reacts directly to mana input. By channeling mana into it, he instantly shapes it into the armament he imagines. Sehun recognizes the feat as proof that Kim In-cheol truly deserves his place among the world's top artisans. At the same time, Sehun senses that Kim In-cheol is no ordinary instructor but someone genuinely formidable. Kim explains that projection alloy is too sensitive for practical combat use, but it reflects unconscious traits back at its user. Because of that property, the armaments made from it are called alter egos, and the refining department's self-introduction assignment will be to create one. The class is told their alter egos will be exhibited in the main building for a week, turning the assignment into a public test of who they really are. As Babel flaunts the value of its projection alloys, Lee Sehun privately notes that the academy is making a grand spectacle of itself. A blonde cadet begins to object, only for the mood to shift before he can finish. Lee realizes the truly important talent has not even been acknowledged yet. When his name is finally called, he rises at once. Seeing his own introduction, Lee decides there is no longer any reason to keep his ability hidden. He commits to revealing what he can really do. He even considers whether to unleash everything at full strength. That thought carries him toward a far larger stage than this ceremony. At the weapon display, the crowd is clearly thicker because of Lee Sehun. Some students still dismiss the hype, insisting a freshman cannot be that exceptional. Their skepticism falters when something unexpected draws their attention. Babel announces that Lee's weapon absorbed 19 nearby projection alloys during production, and instead of correcting the anomaly, the academy displays it as proof of his aptitude. Many students try to explain the result away as a skill effect or institutional favoritism. Erica is not convinced by those excuses. A blonde student beside her agrees that Lee's potential is being underestimated. The display itself suggests that even the available alloys were insufficient to express Lee Sehun's full capacity. Elsewhere, Lee pushes himself through brutal smithing work. Even he feels the strain of what he is attempting. An assistant checks the timing of his work, startled by the precision. Up to that point, Lee has been operating with virtually no timing error at all. The instructors are left wondering what they can possibly teach someone already this exact. One of them half-jokes that it may be easier to skip demonstrating for Lee entirely. Class is dismissed, but Lee remains behind at the forge instead of leaving with everyone else. Exhausted and drenched in sweat, he still reaches for the hammer again. He studies the practice materials and weighs his next move. When an assistant warns him not to break the equipment, Lee realizes these pieces are meant for something beyond class practice. He recognizes the speaker as the assistant and lowers his guard. The assistant explains that the weapons must be delivered after the week's smithing class, so Lee cannot damage them. He further reveals that cadet departments are funded according to how many weapons they sell outside the academy. Then he asks Lee what is actually holding him back right now, his body or his mana. Lee answers honestly that his immediate limitation is his body. He explains that to make the training tools he needs, he must smith heavy ink rock, but he lacks the stamina to even attempt it. The assistant starts thinking through that problem from a smithing perspective. Lee suddenly realizes that enhancement magic might solve his physical weakness faster than training alone. He remembers he had ignored that route before his regression, and now sees its value. Because he has returned to a weaker body, he concludes he could smith heavy ink rock while under a buff instead. Grateful for the insight, Lee thanks the assistant and receives a casual dismissal in return. Before leaving, Lee notices the assistant's forging technique. He bluntly points out that the assistant is wasting mana and should reduce it to about 70% while concentrating the strike on a single point. Lee walks off as if the advice were obvious. The assistant is left stunned that a freshman just corrected him. He can only stand there in silence, trying to process what happened. Meanwhile, Babel's system reminds cadets that they are free to learn autonomously across departments. That freedom comes with strict responsibility, since major courses are mandatory and repeated failure means expulsion. As the train heads toward the Department of Sorcery, the Academy frames this freedom as a test of each cadet's choices. Lee arrives calm and focused. At the station, he unexpectedly runs into Erica and the students accompanying her. One of the boys immediately tries to order Lee out of their way. Lee, unimpressed by the sudden hostility, tells them they should be the ones to move. His refusal catches them off guard and halts their momentum. Erica steps in and asks where he is going. Lee says he is heading to the Department of Sorcery to look for a suitable minor. Erika immediately offers to guide him herself, shocking the boys around her. When they remind her that a gathering awaits, she tells them to go on without her. They protest that the seniors specifically wanted her there. Erika dismisses the invitation outright, making clear she has no interest in it. Lee notices the force of her decision. She falls into step behind him, leaving her companions flustered. As they walk, Erika asks what kind of minor he wants. Lee says he wants to study buffs. More specifically, he needs something that enhances physical ability without interfering with smithing. Erika suggests barrier arts instead, which surprises him because he associates it with defense. She explains that barrier arts can do far more depending on how they are applied. To prove it, she activates a family barrier technique from a spell book. She hands him the enchanted envelope and tells him to try tearing it. Lee first wonders whether she simply increased its durability, then realizes that is not what happened. The envelope keeps its normal nature but hardens only when strong force is applied to it. Erika explains that this kind of delicate control suits smithing well, though mastering such applications would likely require a professor's help. Recognizing the formula as familiar, she offers to personally introduce him to a barrier composition professor connected to her family. Lee abruptly recognizes the spell for what it is. He instantly identifies the mechanism behind the barrier. Erika is shaken that he understood her family's barrier art almost immediately, and even dismantled it. They arrive at the Department of Sorcery. Other students quickly notice Erika walking with Lee and begin whispering about them being together again. Lee dismisses the gossip as idle curiosity, and knows it cannot mean Erika has feelings for him, because no bond has formed between them. Ignoring the rumors, he asks whether the department really screens students before letting them into classes. Erika leads him to the forest used as the testing ground for barrier construction. There, other applicants are already wandering around in frustration, unable to find what they are supposed to locate. Lee dryly compares the test to a treasure hunt. He finds the whole setup irritating. Then he decides the hidden target is probably concealed by a barrier and strikes at the space in front of him. His blow shatters the illusion, revealing the examiners and the true test area. The assistant examiner immediately declares that Lee has passed the first test. The professor can only ask how Lee managed that so casually. Professor Robert Perry of Barrier Construction is informed that Erika has taken an interest in the top student from the Borsippa faculty. He asks to see the evidence for himself. After seeing the photo of Erika guiding Lee, he understands why she suddenly enrolled in a beginner course. He notes that her involvement tripled the number of applicants, though he is far from pleased by the extra trouble. Elsewhere, a red-eyed subordinate reports another request from young Master Inoue. That request is to add a new test built around the labyrinth of illusory souls, a barrier that twists perception and causes people to wander. The professor explains that it is a basic barrier, but anyone ignorant of sorcery would never even notice it existed. He emphasizes that Erika did not help Lee through it. What unsettles him is that Lee broke through the labyrinth purely by instinct. With the first test complete, all applicants are told they have passed that stage. The professor announces a second test that will determine class placement. One eager applicant volunteers first, hoping to impress Erika. The second test requires each cadet to dismantle the barrier before them using only mana while keeping the barrier itself intact. They are warned that speed and accuracy will both matter, and the test begins with a spiderweb barrier whose core is a spider. The professor explains that the spider senses mana through the web and keeps fleeing, while the web endlessly regenerates as long as the spider remains. The first applicant quickly realizes that trying to envelop the entire formula at once exceeds his mana. He changes tactics and decides to overwhelm the core with speed instead. That brute force approach works, but it takes him over 2 minutes and leaves him regretting that he failed to understand the structure first. He receives only a lukewarm evaluation and awkward thanks it as if it were praise. The remaining applicants are called one after another. After several attempts, the professor places them all in the beginner class. Then Erika Inoue is called forward. She accepts the test without hesitation. Instead of chasing the core, Erika steps directly into the formula and begins dismantling it from within. Her mana cuts through the structure in flashes of light. The watching students are stunned by how fast she is and realize she is collapsing the entire sorcery formula at once. The spider core is destroyed almost instantly. Lee recognizes that this is what the top student of the faculty looks like. The professor records a time of 22 seconds and notes that while her result is excellent, the standard method would have been slightly faster. At last, Lee Se-hun is called. At first glance, the barrier seems ordinary to him, so he decides to investigate it directly. Instead of starting immediately, he crouches over the web and studies it while everyone else wonders if he even noticed the test had begun. The spectators start questioning what he is doing. Lee realizes the barrier behaves much like heavyweight or, like that or, it repairs itself and resets unless every stimulus reaches the required threshold and balance at the same time. The professor watches in confusion, unable to tell what Lee intends. When he starts to interfere, Erika stops him and insists that Lee should be left alone. The professor reluctantly backs off. Lee follows the analogy further and wonders whether he can preserve and redirect the accumulated stimuli the way he would in heavyweight or refining. He channels fire through the web and detonates the core with a new formula of his own. The barrier collapses, leaving the examiners and applicants staring at the scorched aftermath. Lee confirms to himself that the method worked. More importantly, he realizes this principle means he can now refine heavyweight ore. Satisfied, he simply stands up and walks away from the ruin test. His casual exit only deepens everyone's shock. The assistant finally checks the time and finds that Lee took 7 minutes and 45 seconds. The professor dismisses the time as irrelevant, because Lee only needed that long to understand the barrier once, and would destroy the same one in seconds next time. What truly matters is that Lee did not merely break the barrier, he created a new formula specifically to destroy the original sorcery formula. Erika silently reassesses him. She realizes that if Lee combined sorcery with his smithing talent, the items he could create would be terrifying. Soon after, Babel administration receives Lee Se-hun's application to attempt intermediate smithing with hero-grade materials and asks for supervisors under workshop safety rules. An administrator idly wonders how many volunteers will respond this time. The answer comes immediately as messages flood in from professors eager to oversee Lee's case. Notably, none of the people aligned with Vice Dean Michael respond, reinforcing rumors that his faction is still bitter after his son lost first place. The administrator prepares to choose among the volunteers. Then a new message changes everything. The dean herself announces that she will personally oversee Lee Se-hun's intermediate smithing. Later, while Lee is working in the forge, he is surprised to hear someone address him directly. The dean arrives in person and explains that she has come to verify his skills herself. Realizing the stakes, Lee resolves to produce a result worthy of her attention. He begins heavy ink rock smithing by choosing the most demanding possible route. That route is the dark curtain process, the hardest method for handling heavy ink rock. The process starts by placing the heavy ink rock in complete darkness. Then, using only mana, the smith must separate the impurities from the rock after it has spread like liquid, shrinking its size while increasing its purity. The dean knows this is effectively reconstructing matter itself, and that it is far easier to describe than to perform. As she watches him begin, even the dean is visibly startled by what Lee is attempting. He decides he can only reduce the material to a quarter of its original intensity, because weakening it any further would ruin the result. With that limit set, he begins the second stage of the forging process. He channels mana into crimson flames to refine the fire itself. The workshop erupts with controlled heat as he forces the flames into obedience under his hands. He explains that he is filtering the crimson flames so that only the suitable fire remains. The stabilized flame becomes a special fire called Flowing Wildfire, which preserves the exact temperature it had at the moment of creation. In the third stage, he repeatedly strikes the heavy ink rock with a hammer wrapped in that wildfire, waiting for the distortion inside the material to gradually diminish. Watching him endure the process, the red-haired woman realizes that even with fire resistance, he must still be suffering through every blow. As the green distortion surges around him, she wonders how much of himself he has already worn away to keep going. Outside, the strange energy draws silent attention from people across the academy grounds. Back inside, the woman can only cover her mouth and watch in tense silence. Hours pass, and she remains beside him through the night. After 4 relentless hours of smithing, his arm is trembling from exhaustion. At last the heavy ink rock reaches its limit, and its properties begin to change as it fully absorbs the flame. When the distortion finally stops, he knows the processing stage is complete. He immediately moves on to melting the processed rock. Instead of forging it further, he pours the molten material into a mold he prepared in advance, alarming the woman because darkness inside the mold should alter the material again. She cannot understand what he is trying to accomplish. He enters a fourth stage, using a barrier dismantling formula to slow the material's transformation just long enough to build a mana circuit into it. The circuit takes shape inside the unstable material in a narrow window of time. The item is completed as an ink spider bracelet, and the system praises his first-rate ability to force new possibilities out of a material even without drawing out its full potential. He also gains a new skill, Black Spirit Thread, and can only laugh weakly at the reward through his exhaustion. The finished bracelet is revealed to be a rare item that stores the wearer's mana, grows heavier with that stored power, and grants the skill Explosive Ring. Realizing the forging succeeded, he starts to celebrate. The woman finally breaks her stunned silence as she looks over the result beside him. An awkward pause follows, with her flustered and him unsure how to read her reaction. He exhales and tries to steady himself after the ordeal. She recognizes that the bracelets have triggered a resonance phenomenon, and is genuinely impressed by how much complexity he hid behind something that looked simple. He admits the resonance is still weak, but thinks a full set might eventually produce a set effect. Knowing he could not yet make her a proper armament despite the trouble she is facing because of him, he offers her the leftover mold material as a small consolation. Something about that answer makes him suddenly focus on her. She activates her unique skill, Soul Smelting Furnace, and consumes the mold material he gave her. When he asks if it was actually edible, she dryly tells him that it was, in a sense. She clarifies that it was only metaphorically edible, though it apparently tasted like fried crumbs. He realizes this odd gift may be a surprisingly effective way to improve his bond with Ryu Unha. Pleased that she liked it, he quietly thinks this could raise their bond level much faster. She admits she still regrets eating the mold scraps while the finished bracelets are sitting right in front of her. Changing the subject, she asks when he plans to deal with the 5-color fire blade and the fire-accumulating sheath. He refuses to sell them for now, leaving her confused enough to wonder if her offer was too low. He explains that he is saving them for the upcoming subjugation class, and jokes that hunger makes the best seasoning. He promises that when he finally has equipment worthy of her, she will be the first to know, and she accepts that promise with clear anticipation. Once she confirms the smithing is finished, he says there is nothing more to do with the workshop. She suggests leaving the cleanup to the staff, and he is relieved because he is too drained to handle it himself. Only then does he realize just how badly his stamina has been mismanaged. His legs give out, and she rushes in to catch him before he collapses. Concerned, she asks if he is alright, and he brushes it off as a minor mistake in how he distributed his stamina. She decides to escort him back to his dorm, but first asks whether he is afraid of heights. He starts to deny it without understanding what she means. Before he can finish, she scoops him up and prepares to move. In the next instant, they launch out of the building. She carries him through the sky at tremendous speed, leaving the academy far below. As her power surges, she realizes the mold she ate has amplified her far more than expected. He answers her surprise by saying the effect makes sense in more ways than one. While they streak across the night sky, he reflects that the world has changed greatly from the one he knew before regressing. Elsewhere, a black-haired girl waits alone for Lee Se-hun, worried because she still needs to give him an invitation. Her long vigil becomes gossip on the academy board, where students note that the freshman valedictorian has been standing outside the refining department for hours. The rumors quickly connect her to the Borsippa department valedictorian and speculate that she is waiting for him again. As comments pile up demanding the post be removed for violating her privacy, she is left bewildered by the sudden attention. Meanwhile, Lee Se-hun ignores whatever messages are chasing him and decides that anything truly important will find him again. A classroom door opens, signaling the start of another part of his academy life. A new instructor introduces himself as Regressor smiles and announces that he will be teaching understanding tools. He immediately turns the supposed theory class into a physical trial by ordering everyone to the training center and threatening the last arrival with 20 laps. The students panic and bolt, stunned by the sudden change in tone. Lee Se-hun can only stare in disbelief that a theory class has become this. With no better answer, he joins the rush and tells himself to just run. He struggles to keep up as the others pull ahead. By the time he reaches the arena, the penalty is already waiting for him. Accepting the punishment, he starts the 20 laps without complaint. As he runs, others dismiss him as physically bottom tier and even question whether he properly completed the intermediate smithing course. When the instructor finally gathers everyone, the real lesson begins. Regressor explains that understanding tools used to be a class about armament structure, but recent events have forced the curriculum to change. He reveals that blacksmiths who create hero-grade or higher fire blades are being hunted by a group known as the Flame Blade Hunters. Lee Se-hun recognizes the case as one that remained unsolved even before his regression, and concludes that in the end a blacksmith's own body is the last line of defense. Regressor confirms that this class will now teach both tool knowledge and the techniques needed to protect oneself. The day's subject is swords, and Lee Se-hun realizes he has to be more careful from now on. As he keeps moving, he decides that the first thing he must improve is his stamina. He tests the ink spider bracelet while running and confirms that its gravity-based explosive ring is genuinely useful. Seeing his stats rise across the board, he vows to make this body truly usable before the end of his first year. Regressor suddenly calls him over and orders him to stop running. Instead of merely obeying, Lee Se-hun activates explosive ring. The instructor notes that he is in better shape than expected. Regressor hands him a sword and decides to test whether swordsmanship suits him. Lee Se-hun knows the bracelet's weight will hinder his movement, but he still prepares to fight. Facing the instructor, he considers using the rough sword technique he picked up elsewhere. He attacks first, driving in with a direct downward strike. The watching students think he looks slow from exhaustion, though they admit his form is not bad. Regressor sees something deeper, recognizing that Lee Se-hun's blade already understands the path it should take. That realization makes the instructor take the exchange seriously. He judges the attack too hasty and thinks the flaw should be corrected before anything else. Lee Se-hun suddenly senses a dangerous shift in the exchange. For an instant, Regressor is shaken by the pressure coming from the cadet in front of him. In that moment, Lee Se-hun's strike seems to cut through the instructor in his mind before the real clash even resolves. The shock of that imagined outcome leaves Regressor visibly rattled. When the blades meet for real, the instructor is still unsettled by what he felt. He cannot believe he momentarily feared a technical cadet, and wonders if fatigue is making him hallucinate. Trying to regain control, he asks who taught Lee Se-hun that swordsmanship. Lee Se-hun hesitates, because the answer is not simple. He remembers that the technique came from a shabby drunk who claimed to have invented it in 10 minutes. That man had laughed off repayment, and treated the whole thing like a casual favor. When pressed for money, he had instead forced the technique on Lee Se-hun as payment, and refused to let him leave without taking it. So Lee Se-hun awkwardly downplays it as something he pieced together from watching recordings of heroes' battles. Regressor repeats the word swordsmanship as if testing whether that explanation can possibly be true. Later that afternoon, Lee Se-hun follows a recommendation letter to another instructor at a Kharkov for body control training. He arrives with no idea what kind of person he is about to meet. He finds a furious man kicking a blonde student while shouting that he has nothing left to teach him. The man is revealed to be the retired S-class hero sword breaker Ma Guangsu. Lee Se-hun is stunned that the washed-up gambler and drunk he once knew is actually a professor. He introduces himself as a refining freshman and presents Rickrose's recommendation. Ma Guangsu is surprised that Rickrose sent him someone, while the blonde student points out that Lee Se-hun is this year's Borsippa valedictorian. Even so, Ma Guangsu dismisses Lee Se-hun as painfully ordinary at first glance. He asks the blonde student whether he really wants to learn from him that badly, and the answer is an immediate yes. Ma Guangsu then sets a condition for accepting him. He must beat that blonde student. The test is a single match, with victory going to whoever lands the first valid hit. With the terms set, Ma Guangsu gives the signal to begin. The blonde valedictorian charges at once, confident in overwhelming Lee Se-hun. Lee Se-hun lowers himself and loosens his body instead of meeting force with force. Watching closely, Ma Guangsu realizes Lee Se-hun is using relaxation to maximize flexibility by stripping unnecessary tension from his body. He immediately identifies the proper answer to that kind of movement: grappling, not striking. Annoyed, he mutters that this kind of clever prodigy style is exactly what he hates. Before the blonde student can settle the exchange cleanly, Lee Se-hun slips inside his line. He crashes into the blonde student's center and turns the clash into close-quarters control. Even Lee Se-hun is startled by the raw force behind the other student's body. The blonde student tries to reverse the position and slam him down. At the critical instant, Lee Se-hun triggers explosive ring. The bracelet releases a burst of gravity manipulation around his arm. That sudden shift breaks the blonde student's balance and drives him hard into the floor instead. Lee Se-hun hits the ground too and can only groan from the impact. The blonde student lies stunned, unable to recover in time. Blood at his mouth confirms the match ended decisively. Lee Se-hun, battered but satisfied, notes that he was just a little faster. As the blonde student kneels in shock, Ma Guangsu stares at Lee Se-hun and fixates on the attack he used earlier against Rickrose. He abruptly orders everyone else out, reminding them that he only promised to teach Lee Se-hun if he won. Lee Se-hun immediately presses the point, arguing that if the blonde student lost to him, then perhaps the professor should be teaching that student instead. Ma Guangsu cruelly remarks that an Akar-Cuff valedictorian losing to a Borsippa cadet sounds pathetic, humiliating the blonde student on the spot. Then, deciding the boy still has some use, he agrees to make the half-wit competent enough to justify keeping him around. The blonde student lights up when Ma Guangsu promises to set a training time and send word. He blurts out his thanks, only to be dismissed and sent away at once. Once they are alone, Ma Guangsu tells Lee Se-hun he has something specific to discuss with him. He asks Lee Se-hun to show him the sword technique he used on Rickrose. Lee Se-hun agrees and prepares himself seriously. He launches the same killing stroke again with full intent. Ma Guangsu intercepts it effortlessly, stopping the attack before it can fully form. Pinned in place, Lee Se-hun realizes the technique is a first-sight kill that only works once. Ma Guangsu judges the idea sound but the execution crude, and points out that any swordsmanship that becomes a weakness after the first use is fundamentally flawed. He says that if anyone had been teaching this as a proper technique, he would have broken their limbs, leaving Lee Se-hun to quietly hide the truth. Rather than backing down, Lee Se-hun vows to build a real body worthy of that skeletal technique. He then confirms that this means he is officially accepted into the class, and Ma Guangsu reluctantly admits that he is. Satisfied, Lee Se-hun bows and says he will leave for the day. Watching him go, Ma Guangsu thinks the boy is absurdly stiff in manner. As Lee Se-hun walks away acting composed, the blonde student calls after him, while Ma Guangsu dismisses the whole performance as empty after-service swagger. As he is about to leave, a blonde classmate stops him with something important. The classmate hands him a sealed invitation he had been saving for him. He learns it is an invitation to noblesse, a gathering place for cadets from prestigious families, and realizes Erica may have intended to give him the same thing. The blonde cadet urges him to treat it as a useful opportunity, but he hesitates to accept such a weighty favor. The blonde cadet insists this is only fair repayment for helping him get into the class. He accepts the gesture with simple gratitude. As he walks away, he reviews his plans and decides he still wants a minor on the Borsippa side in addition to barrier composition and body control. Enchanting rises to the top of his list as he considers curse work, alchemy, and related fields. Before he can continue that thought, someone abruptly grabs his attention. He instantly sharpens his focus toward the interruption. A red-haired senior fixates on the bracelet he is wearing and immediately asks if he made it himself. He teases her by refusing to confirm it outright. That answer sends Leah Claudel into a frenzy, and his system quietly establishes a bond with her. He recognizes her as the legendary enchanting genius who revolutionized the field by raising an armament to full grades. Her reputation is so overwhelming that even rare-grade heavy ink rock is treated as trivial in her hands. Leah studies his bracelet like a masterpiece and starts mentally rewriting it with better formulas. While he watches her spiral deeper into obsession, she anxiously asks whether the armament itself is somehow flawed. She blurts out that the opposite is true. The compatibility is absurdly high, giving her too many possible enchantment paths to choose from. He calmly concludes that if her only problem is having too many good options, then there is no real problem. When she looks up in confusion, he tells her there is still one more thing she should consider. He adds that the bracelet also has a resonance phenomenon, which completely changes how it should be enchanted. That insight leaves Leah stunned enough to ask what kind of person he really is, and he introduces himself as Lee Sehun, the first-year valedictorian of the Borsippa refining department. Leah is amazed that someone that accomplished is only a freshman and introduces herself as a third year in the enchantment department. Their conversation is cut off when a stern cadet arrives and demands that he follow him. Leah immediately recognizes the newcomer as one of Erika's people and protests that she was speaking with Sehun first. The man insists he only wants a quiet private word, but Sehun refuses to leave and tells him to speak openly. The cadet demands that Sehun apologize to Erika for publicly tearing up her invitation. Sehun answers that Erika herself told him to destroy it. The man admits that might have been true, but says the real issue is that Sehun accepted an invitation from Myers instead. Sehun immediately guesses Erika sent him to interfere. The cadet denies acting under orders, though even Leah does not believe him. Leah openly mocks the lie. She reminds him that everyone knows he serves Erika's young master, exposing his supposed independence as nonsense. Humiliated, the cadet lashes out and tries to crush Sehun with force while belittling him as a washed-up nobody. Sehun remains unmoved as the man warns that Babel is full of people far above him. He lets the threat hang for a moment. Then he cuts back with a cold question about whether the man is really describing himself. The insult enrages the cadet enough to unleash a full attack. Sehun reacts instantly and prepares a counter instead of retreating. Illusory beasts descend on them, but he raises his hand without panic. By reading the attack correctly, he realizes the illusion is being carried through real daggers used as mediums. The cadet is shaken that Sehun saw through the trick so quickly. Sehun catches one of the daggers and refuses to explain how he figured it out. Instead, he activates Gluttony Iron, joking that the weapon looked too tasty to ignore and that it will cover the $1,000,000 he lost. He identifies the bond's nature at once, a supreme iron that devours other iron, corrodes it, and turns it into mineral blood. Using that advantage, he launches an explosive ring straight at his attacker. The cadet tries to answer with brute force. The clash ends with the cadet dropped to his knees while Sehun stands over him, having protected Leah as well. Leah, still rattled, suddenly remembers she is supposed to be the senior here. Sehun ignores the awkwardness and asks her to recommend an enchantment department lecture. The question catches her completely off guard. She recommends ancient enchanting and cannot resist advertising herself as one of the department's best seniors. Elsewhere, the beaten cadet retreats in frustration, furious that a freshman outreacted him. Before he can dwell on it, a woman steps in and asks to inspect the dagger Sehun used against him. He is shocked to discover the person questioning him is Erika herself. Under pressure, he hands over the dagger. Erika tells him not to report this incident to her brother because she will speak directly to the family head instead. He awkwardly agrees, and she notes that the dagger's anti-theft enchantment confirms it was meant to be used as a catalyst. As she studies it, Erika realizes Sehun may have created a countermeasure specifically against the magic she and Professor Robert use. Back in class, Sehun reflects that his aptitude for smithing may deserve a much higher evaluation than he was given. His system then establishes a new bond with Erika, making him suspect she witnessed the fight after all. He decides that if she saw enough to form a bond, then at least he was compensated for the trouble. He counts the captured daggers and decides they are crude but still useful material when combined with his black spirit thread. In a later lecture, he finds himself bored because the professor is covering theories he already knows. The professor moves from explanation to practical instruction. He explains that even the same metal can take completely different forms depending on how its mana arrangement is altered. He demonstrates that metal deformation is the foundation of a weapon's versatility. The lesson emphasizes that a blacksmith must fully understand the potential hidden inside the metal being handled. As the professor lays out iron ingots, Sehun quietly pays close attention. The class is told they will practice metal deformation using those ingots. The assignment is to carve a precise scratch at the center by manipulating mana, and the cadets are warned that the specially adjusted ingots react very sensitively. Sehun notes that the professor has not abandoned magical smithing after all, and the exercise begins under a 10-minute limit. Most of the class immediately fails, warping their ingots beyond recovery while the professor watches in grim silence. Only 2 cadets keep pace with the task from the start. Sehun and a blonde rival finish the first stage at nearly the same moment. The professor advances only those 2 to the next phase. He projects a more complex arrangement for them to copy as the next test. The blonde cadet becomes convinced he can finally beat Sehun because their speed and completeness look similar. The professor reveals an even more complicated arrangement. The blonde cadet rushes to perfect it before Sehun can respond. He imagines this will be the moment everyone recognizes him. Instead, the professor abruptly singles him out by name. He is ordered to restore the ingot to its original form, which immediately unsettles him. He realizes too late that the mana arrangement inside his ingot has been ruined beyond repair. The professor explains that the ingot did not fail because of the final deformation but because the processing method was wrong from the beginning. He reminds the cadet that understanding the metal's true potential matters more than blindly following instructions. The lesson becomes harsher. If a manipulated arrangement cannot be restored, the material has not been properly deformed but damaged. The blonde cadet accepts the criticism, while Sehun quietly notes that the professor may have noticed something unusual. He wonders whether the professor caught the same hidden detail he did. To test that suspicion, Sehun casually restores his own ingot while pretending it is nothing special. The restoration succeeds perfectly. The class is stunned because the professor had just implied that such a recovery should not be possible. Now openly interested, the professor asks Sehun to demonstrate the deformation again. Sehun quickly downplays the feat, claiming it only worked because the ingot was a cadet training piece rather than standard iron. The professor accepts the explanation on the surface, though it is clear he is still thinking about what he missed. Privately, he is shaken that even he failed to notice the trick at first. He recalls the legendary blacksmith Lee Kent's and the foundational formula that all blacksmiths still rely on. That formula, the truth of iron, has remained unquestioned for decades as the core of metal deformation. The professor starts to wonder whether Sehun may have found a path outside that accepted truth. Time passes, and the class reaches its end. After dismissal, the professor stops Sehun and asks for a private word. As thanks for helping him enter Babel, the professor presents him with a rare crimson fire jade. He explains that absorbing its essence can permanently strengthen Sehun's crimson flame, which he prepared because he heard Sehun can wield that attribute. Sehun sincerely accepts, recognizing how valuable the gift is. The professor then asks whether Sehun intends to take the minor course he teaches. Sehun realizes he means armament fundamental studies. He confirms that he knows the course and remembers it is one of Babel's best-funded classes. Thinking back to his previous life, he concludes that a professor he never even heard of back then likely met a bad end despite his current prominence. Even so, Sehun decides the course is worth taking and agrees. When the professor worries that Sehun has already overloaded himself with minors, Sehun jokes that this would only make it his fourth. The professor accepts that answer and seals their new working relationship with a handshake. The moment they shake hands, Sehun's system extracts a bond from Kim In-cheol and identifies it as flame-bearing iron, a metal that can store fire like wood stores heat. Later, alone in his room, Sehun reflects that if metal can be extracted from a person, then a person's body can also be forged like material. He reviews the danger of mixing multiple mana attributes in one body, a conflict that normally ruins a blacksmith's precision and forces them to rely on only one. He decides that rule does not apply to him, and begins using the Crimson Fire Jade to strengthen his own Crimson Flame. By draining his mana first, he lets his body naturally draw in the Jade's essence. His goal is not merely to absorb the flame but to build a dedicated internal mana circuit for it inside his body. The process pushes him to his limit, but he endures it. He visualizes his body as a forge and his mana as the machinery needed to shape it. Then he turns that forge inward and begins smithing himself. The result is immediate. His Crimson Flame attribute rises from F2+. He also gains the S-grade skill Spirit Body Smithing Magic, which boosts all his physical stats by forging his internal mana circuits. The new skill reminds him of Lee's harsh lesson that having the right materials means nothing if he gives up before learning how to use them. Remembering her challenge, he refuses to settle for limits others accept. He resolves to use every possible resource this time around. Whether someone becomes ally or enemy, he vows not to repeat the regrets of his previous life. On another day in the workshop, the cadets are told to finish and wrap up the items they have been making, because today's results will shape the rest of the semester. Their instructor warns that what they produce now will determine the pace of their entire first term, so they must give everything they have. The room answers with determined energy as everyone throws themselves into the work. Sehun judges his own progress harshly, seeing flaws everywhere because his body still cannot fully keep up with his technique. He decides this is no time for restraint and pushes harder. Balancing fire, hammering, and cooling in rapid succession, he forces the blade into shape. When he checks the result, he decides it is acceptable for now. He knows he lacks time to perfect everything and that a merely decent overall performance would earn him more budget. Even so, he chooses to make at least one weapon properly rather than spread himself thin. He commits to the final refinement of a single blade. A brief pause lets him listen for the right moment. He hears the sound that once accompanied the end of the world. For him, that terrible sound has become the sign that a truly good item is about to be born. Using only basic materials, he engraves a permanent edge into the blade itself and completes the White Light Longsword. The finished weapon earns him the skill White Light Style, and is recognized as a high-quality rare armament whose cutting power rises when mana is infused. Even after creating it, he still judges the sword as merely decent because it was made from ordinary iron. Still, he can feel a faint return of the blacksmithing mastery he possessed before regression. Around him, other cadets despair over their own crude results, making his success stand out even more. The next morning, he meets Leah again after she agrees to show him her enchanting. She is amused by his interests, while he admits he was curious about her fundamentals as well, and she leads him somewhere more private. The walk takes them far from the crowded campus, and she makes clear that her enchanting is not something she reveals casually. She finally brings him to a secluded hardware store called the Kharkov. The moment they step inside, Leah excitedly calls out for her grandmother. A voice answers from within, confirming that the person Leah wanted him to meet is here. The white-haired shop owner snaps that she heard them perfectly well and refuses to be talked around. When the newcomers tease her about the man beside them, she immediately rejects the idea and sizes them up instead. The black-haired freshman is identified as Lee Sehun, a top entrant from Borsippa, though others dismiss him as too gentle-looking for babble. The red-haired student introduces herself as Helena, and Sehun formally states that he is a first year in the refining department. Helena's grandmother cuts off the chatter and orders them to stop fooling around because the freshmen have left too much work unfinished. She directs them into the workshop and puts them to work without ceremony. As Sehun looks around, he revises his first impression and realizes the old woman is far more capable than she seemed. Even while helping, he wonders why someone with her skill is running a humble hardware shop, while Helena complains about how much work has piled up. The old woman begins explaining her craft, introducing the enchant palette and the powdered magic stones used in it. Sehun quickly grasps that she restores damaged enchantment formulas with these materials and notices Helena handles far more than the standard range of colors. Helena proudly confirms that his guess is correct. She explains that this work lets her earn money while practicing enchantment freely without worrying about material costs. Helena throws herself into the process, drawing power into her brush as she works. Her enchantment takes shape on a pan, proving that even ordinary-looking tools can become vessels for magic in her hands. Watching her, Sehun admits he came because he thought she was in a slump. That thought is tied to the humiliation she suffered after losing her valedictorian standing and being mocked as a fallen talent. But after seeing her work firsthand, he concludes he already understands both the cause of her slump and how to fix it. Before leaving, he tells Helena that her ability to lose herself completely in her craft is itself a rare gift. His attention shifts to the workshop bench as a new idea forms. Studying the materials there, he realizes one of them resonates with mana in a way that could produce a special effect. Since he has been itching to try engraving white light again, he asks to test it on something. The old woman challenges him to prove himself by taking any discarded item from the pile if he thinks he can manage it. Sehun accepts at once, eager to test a whetstone of such quality. He focuses, already seeing a method the others have missed. From the junk pile, he picks up a worn kitchen knife. The old woman is openly doubtful that he intends to work with something so ordinary. Sehun explains that the knife's even wear and straight axes show it belonged to someone trained in weapon handling, not just cooking. He also identifies the best whetstone by sensing that its mana particles are compressed more evenly than the others, making it suitable for sharpening to the limit. He begins sharpening with calm confidence. Watching him, the old woman is startled that a first-year freshman can judge tools and materials so precisely. Helena suddenly announces that she has finished her own task. Only then does she notice her grandmother has been standing nearby the whole time and gets caught acting too casually. She gleefully points out that her grandmother tried to find fault with her junior and ended up being the one corrected. Her grandmother shuts her up with a painful flick before the teasing can continue. The old woman turns back to Sehun and asks whether he is done. He modestly says this is only the best he can do for now and promises he will do better next time. The old woman ends the exchange and sends both students back to their own business. Helena drags Sehun out, laughing that her grandmother is just being cranky again. Left alone, the old woman stares at the sharpened knife in silence. Her brother bursts in from the restaurant next door, asking whether she has finished the kitchen knife because orders are backing up. She tells him to stop shouting and answer the real question instead. Their usual argument resurfaces as he complains that a combat professor should quit wasting time on restaurant work, while she dismisses his nagging as meddling with her hobby. He grabs the knife, expecting the same rough work as always. The moment he tests it, he realizes something is different. He assumes his sister must have sharpened it while drunk again, but she denies it and lets him know someone else did the job. When he asks who could have done it, she answers that it was a freshman. She makes it clear that a student who only entered this year produced this result. Outside, Sehun becomes the subject of sudden curiosity as word spreads about the unknown freshman. Helena explains that her grandmother was once a metallurgy professor before retiring and opening the hardware shop. Sehun asks whether there was some deeper reason behind that decision, but Helena knows nothing specific. Still, he notes that many professors have left metallurgy over the last decade, and with the department destined to become Babel's weakest, he decides this is not a coincidence to ignore. Helena eagerly asks what he thought of her enchantment, wanting praise more than any larger mystery. Sehun tells her fundamentals are strong, but also points out that her thinking is too narrow. He presses her on why she ignored a better method she had already imagined. Then he bluntly teaches her that ignorance can be fixed by learning, but knowing better and still refusing to act is a deeper flaw because a creator's imagination is itself a weapon. Helena is shaken because he has named a truth she had never been able to articulate. Seeing she is finally listening, Sehun decides to demonstrate rather than lecture further. He warns her that he has little time and tells her to pay close attention. He explains forging as placing the real stone beneath the water's surface, and he defines enchantment as shaping the image of that hidden stone above the water, making it something dreamlike by nature. Using the knife, he demonstrates a layered enchantment he calls Crimson Lotus. He follows it with White Radiance Flow, showing how a second current can be laid over the first. He explains that true enhancement need not sit on the surface of a weapon but can be embedded deep within it. If one layer is not enough, he says, then the answer is to divide the effect into multiple layers. He swings the knife to show how those hidden layers can be released in motion. The blade's force erupts outward, proving the concept in a single clean strike. The cut lands with far more reach and precision than the knife should have possessed. He explains that by following Crimson Lotus, killing intent can be made to descend along the flow instead of exploding all at once. Even he admits it is not yet a complete enchantment, but it is enough to open a new path. Helena is left stunned, realizing that true geniuses keep advancing even while hesitating. Her shock turns to excitement, and she begs to borrow the knife so she can study and recreate what he just did. She clings to him and promises to remake it properly, and return it if he will only let her keep it for a while. Sehun agrees and even offers her the remaining materials he used. Overjoyed, Helena practically confesses her devotion and gratitude before running off with the knife and supplies. Left behind, Sehun can only watch her disappear in a burst of enthusiasm. A system-like notice appears, telling him he has extracted a connection from Ray Claudel and formed a level 1 bond with the creator Lee Si-hoon, which makes him remark on how young the source is. With that done, he turns his attention to the next event, thinking that today he will finally witness one of the three hounds and the clash between a young mad dog and a demon god of extinction. Before he can go far, a black-haired girl appears behind him and asks what exactly he is doing. She bluntly says she has been following him, and he immediately doubts she would leave even if told to. She confirms that she will stay nearby no matter what, forcing him to give up on shaking her off. Resigned, he tells her to come along as a faint trace of white radiance still circles him. His ability then identifies two connected materials, including a high-grade catalyst tied to Ray Claudel and another contact stone tied to Inoue Erika. The scene shifts to the Marshall Hall, where the ranking match for Babel's new students is announced. A lively young professor named Lan Fong introduces herself as the host and hypes up the event. She calls for the competitors to be presented. The first spotlight falls on Arya Myers, the top senior of a Calcup's fourth year and heir to a family famous for producing S-rank heroes. Her reputation is piled even higher as a 3-year rank 1 champion of the Marshall Hall and an active A-rank hero. She is finally named outright as Arya Myers, the Holy Sword Master who conquered the Hero's Tower. The crowd erupts for her, while the first challenger is introduced as the one daring enough to face the champion. That challenger is Yeom Seonga, a rising spear prodigy from Korea and the current rank 10 of the Marshall Hall. Watching from the stands, Sehun recognizes that he has finally met the young mad dog he came to see. Yeom Seonga enters with open hostility, already radiating the ferocity that earned his name. The match begins with a storm of flaming spear arcs crashing toward Arya. Yeom presses the attack relentlessly, trying to overwhelm her with speed and heat. Arya meets the assault with effortless composure, smiling as she reads him. He escalates again, driving forward with even greater force. But frustration leaks through when he realizes she is still in control. He channels more power into the spear, determined to break through by brute force. Arya's expression barely changes, which only makes his aggression look more reckless. With a single poised motion, she turns his flaming momentum into a ring around herself and neutralizes it. Yeom launches one last descending strike, betting everything on a direct finish. From the stands, Sehun judges that the attack is poor even for someone so young and suspects Yeom was never properly supported as the inheritor of his spear art. He concludes that the real problem is not Yeom himself but the weapon and method he was given. Yeom suddenly abandons the spear and lunges barehanded, trying to salvage the exchange with raw instinct. Arya's sword stops just short of his throat before he can land anything. Faced with the undeniable gap between them, Yeom freezes. He lowers his head and admits defeat. Arya praises his effort with easy confidence as the sparring match is declared over. The arena announces Arya Myers as the winner. Lan Fong tries to move into post-match interviews, but Yeom has already left the arena before anyone can stop him. Arya laughs that facing rank 9 next would be tiring even for her, turning the interruption into a joke. The crowd eagerly accepts her offer to fill the time with a Q&A while Yeom walks off in a foul mood. Sehun notes with amusement that the brat is clearly furious. The black-haired girl asks whether he is really leaving without watching the rest, and he says yes because Arya does not interest him. As he goes, he dismisses her as irritating. Left behind, the girl wonders why he is so angry and reassures herself that at least he did not come to see her brother. Arya, however, notices the departing freshman and becomes intrigued by him. She turns away from the crowd with a private thought, clearly deciding he may matter after all. In her eye, Sehun's reflection lingers, and she begins to suspect there may indeed be someone worth watching. Outside near the martial arts hall, Yeom sits alone in the park, trying to cool his rage after the loss. Sehun approaches him directly and opens by stating that Yeom Seonga is still alive and well. He reflects that this man once died defeating the demon god of the Sea of Extinction and that, despite his rough nature, he had been one of the pillars of the Death Squad. Because Yeom has not yet become the broken figure Sehun remembers, Sehun hopes he can obtain the bond stone more smoothly this time. Yeom senses him and remarks that anyone who found him here must be skilled. The moment he recognizes Sehun as Borsippa's valedictorian, his tone turns openly hostile. Sehun is puzzled by the intensity of the reaction and says he only wanted to talk. Yeom cuts him off and tells him to leave. When Sehun insists the conversation could help him, Yeom interrupts with a blunt warning that he will say this only once. He hates weaklings. He adds that he despises people who cannot stand on their own and especially those who mistake petty tricks for equality with him, so Sehun should go back. Sehun answers with a single word that strikes home: blacksmith. He realizes that compared to the violent Yom he once knew, this version is actually holding back, but also that words alone will not reach him. So Sehun quietly prepares mana in his hand, deciding to force the issue. Yom turns back, sensing that the freshman has no intention of retreating. Sehun tells him he only needs to hear one thing. Then he declares that the history of the Flame Wheel Ember Spear will end because of Yom. That accusation enrages Yom, and he charges without hesitation. A hidden observer moves at the same instant, ready to intervene if needed. Before the blow can land, Sehun catches the incoming fist head-on instead of dodging. His bond imprint, Gluttony Iron, activates and tears apart the ember power woven into Yom's strike. Yom is stunned that his man-infused punch was not blocked but dismantled. Seeing Sehun standing unharmed, he is forced to admit the freshman has earned the right to speak. Yet he also realizes the ember trajectory of his spear art still remains in Sehun's grasp, and that this is the true core of the Flame Wheel Ember Spear. Sehun immediately turns that stolen ember back on him and declares that the line ends here. The redirected power erupts and blasts Yom away with his own technique. Smoke and heat swallow the scene as the impact settles. Sehun stands in the aftermath, calm and barely winded. Yom stares at his own ember now responding in Sehun's hand and realizes the impossible has happened. The truth hits him at once. Sehun did not merely block the technique, he dismantled it and stole it. A final streak of ember cuts past as Sehun watches the result with quiet satisfaction. Yom can only grind out a furious thought, recognizing Sehun as a dangerous bastard. As his temper nears the breaking point, the young man braces himself to lash out. He reflects that the Flame Flower Gate massacre likely came from the same violent streak in his nature. That thought hardens into action as he moves to strike. He throws a punch while realizing the boost from Gluttony Iron is fading and his body is already at its limit. Even exhausted, he commits to the blow before his enhancement fully runs out. The impact erupts with enough force to shake the area. He catches the other student's hand in the aftermath, stopping the clash from escalating further. The blonde student recognizes him as Jake Myers and is startled that he stepped in. Jake abruptly asks whether the senior knows the valedictorian of the Borsippa department, and gets a hesitant yes. Satisfied, the senior falls silent and decides what to do next. He dismisses them with a curt order, and Jake hurriedly drags Sehun away before anything stranger happens. As they retreat, Jake cuts off Sehun's attempt to speak and urges him to leave quietly. Left alone, the senior regrets losing control, throwing the punch, and risking trouble for both his master and the Flame Wheel Ember Spear. His shame lingers as he replays the mistake. Once they are away, Jake scolds Lee Sehun for provoking a senior strong enough to kill him if the fight had continued. Sehun brushes it off and claims he had only been bluffing. At the same time, a system message confirms he has formed a bond with Yom Songha, and he immediately starts thinking about how to exploit it. He decides that the real Yom Songha is far softer than the Mad Dog reputation suggests, which means the bond may be easier to deepen than expected. He also judges Jake useful and starts sounding him out while they walk. Jake laughs off his bruised hand and insists he is fine. Sehun notes the claim but shifts to the question that actually matters to him. He asks what Jake said about his sister at the arena, and Jake confirms he means Arya Myers. Jake admits he only called her arrogant, then panics when he realizes that comment must have reached her. He concludes that Arya has taken an interest in Sehun. Jake is amazed Sehun overheard that in the crowd, then nervously explains that his sister is an A-rank hero and not someone to attract lightly. Sehun welcomes the attention because Yom Songha's greatest obsession is surpassing Arya, so drawing her interest should naturally make him more important to Songha. Jake tries to warn him that Arya is dangerous in ways he does not understand. Sehun bluntly guesses that she is petty and insidious, leaving Jake too flustered to deny it cleanly. Jake awkwardly backpedals while Sehun watches him with amusement. Sehun presses further and asks why Jake hates his sister so much. That question brings up Arya's true identity as the Sword Saint. He recalls that even her famous sword once failed to impress her. The memory expands into the legend that the Sword Saint vanished and returned transformed after forging a blade from the remains of a demon god. Remembering that story, Sehun concludes that Arya is trouble incarnate. With that thought, he parts ways and leaves Jake behind. Jake is left staring after him, confused by the abrupt exit. A message on his phone suddenly gives him the answer. Arya tells Jake that Sehun seems interesting and orders him to keep reporting everything, effectively turning him into a go-between. Jake is horrified to realize he has been trapped between the two of them. Arya doubles down by mockingly asking her brother for that favor herself. Jake is left alone on the street, burdened with his sister's demand. The next morning at Babel Academy, Sehun wonders if he pushed Yom Songha too far while waiting for class to begin. Before he can dwell on it, a flamboyant substitute professor bursts in and seizes everyone's attention. The man introduces himself as Reese Dova and announces that he will handle their major classes for 2 weeks, starting with attribute refining. The students immediately recognize him as the notoriously unhinged professor and brace for trouble. Reese says he has brought back the results of last week's refining assignment along with each student's first semester budget, then begins calling them forward one by one. After working through the class, he saves one name for last. When he calls Lee Sehun, the room expects him to receive an enormous budget. Instead, Reese announces that Sehun's budget has not been released at all. He explains that Sehun's submission was so complete it has been entered into the second-year public auction instead. The budget will be determined by the winning bid there, making Sehun's case exceptional enough to seem like special handling. Sehun suspects Vice Dean Michael is behind it, but accepts the explanation because no one above has objected. Class finally begins with a lesson on residual mana. Reese brings in a volunteer assistant, and the room is stunned to see Yeom Sung-ha himself. Sehun immediately focuses on the senior's presence far more than on the lecture. Reese cuts off the distraction and moves straight into the fundamentals. He explains that armaments are built around two broad forms of residual mana. One must be externally charged, while the other can sustain itself by generating or absorbing mana, though that independent type is far harder to make. Because mana cores vary with materials, methods, and the creator's own mana, there is no single standard way to build them. For that reason, the class will start with the simpler charging type, and Reese turns the demonstration over to his assistant. Yeom Sung-ha calmly gathers fire mana in his hand. Reese explains that fire mana is especially unstable as residual mana, so controlling it at all is proof of excellent retention. He presents Sung-ha's Flame Will Ember Spear as the model example of that control. The students are awed that he can handle fire mana so precisely when most of them struggle with far less. Reese decides to exploit having such a gifted assistant, and turns the demonstration into their next assignment. The class is ordered to create any charging type armament they want, as long as it uses fire attribute residual mana and follows the Flame Wheel theme. He then sends everyone to the refining room and reminds them to change clothes first. The students instantly realize this is their best chance to approach Yeom Sung-ha. One eager student rushes forward, thrilled by the chance to speak with him directly. Sung-ha shuts him down before he can even introduce himself, and tells him to disappear. The rejection is so brutal it crushes the mood of everyone watching. Sung-ha remains outwardly cold and unreadable. As Sehun heads out, Sung-ha stops him by name. He immediately demands to know what Sehun really knows about him. Sehun answers by revealing knowledge of the Flame Wheel Ember Spear's ranking system and the fact that the current sect leader once reached 8 wheels. He goes further and states that Sung-ha should be capable of sustaining 6 wheels, not merely the 3 he just displayed. That claim makes Sung-ha chase after him instead of letting him leave. He is shaken when Sehun bluntly says he once reached the 7th wheel. Sehun even knows that Sung-ha later lost the ability to maintain it, a secret Sung-ha has not shared even with his sect leader. Sehun claims he noticed because he has an unusual sensitivity to fire, and Sung-ha's flames felt wrong to him. He diagnoses the problem as Sung-ha's inability to properly detonate and release the remaining power in his flames. Sung-ha, now fully invested, asks whether Sehun knows the cause. Sehun admits he has a theory, but he refuses to explain it for free, forcing Sung-ha to recognize that this is a negotiation. Sung-ha swallows his pride and tells him to name his terms. Sehun first demands proper payment for all advice and help he provides. Second, he insists that Sung-ha consult him whenever a difficult decision arises. He gives Sung-ha until they reach the refining room to decide whether to accept. By the time they arrive, Sung-ha agrees. Sehun accepts the deal only if Sung-ha proves he is serious. That afternoon in the smithing workshop, Sehun begins working while the other students whisper about his methods. They are baffled that he is crafting without even sketching a blueprint, or pausing for verification. He confidently selects fire ore and dark ore in a 7:3 ratio. Watching from nearby, Sung-ha is confused that the valedictorian seems to be wasting the materials. Sehun explains that the key moment is when heat makes the attribute mana start leaking out. He prepares his hand for a delicate intervention. Then he directly manipulates the leaking energy instead of letting it disperse. He names the technique thermal substitution, controlling flame and mana together so the attribute is retained, and Reese immediately realizes Sehun's auction-worthy submission was no fluke. Sehun notes to himself that what looks ordinary to others should appear very different to Yeom Sung-ha. He tells Sung-ha to watch carefully. He begins the crucial shaping step. Sehun explains that the fire mana pushing outward must be placed inside while the dark mana pulling inward must wrap around it, so the opposing forces balance into a perfect circle. Sung-ha initially thinks that is all there is to it, but he immediately realizes the method relies on the very second mana attribute he has been taught to treat as a hindrance to the Flame Wheel Ember Spear. He admits that using it this way caused his mastery to collapse from the 7th wheel to the 5th. Sehun demonstrates the result anyway, producing 5 black flame wheels and explaining that while Sung-ha lacks the strength for 6, those 5 are already stronger than 7 ordinary flame wheels. Sung-ha reveals that the Flame Flower Gate regularly tests its successors in the outside world. If a successor falls below the 6th wheel, they lose that status. And if he simply repeats the unstable method that once ruined him, it will not save him now. He adds that his dark mana has become too unruly to control directly. So he asks when the next instructor from the sect will arrive. When Sung-ha says it will be tomorrow, Sehun realizes there is only one day to prevent his expulsion. He points at Sung-ha and decides on the spot to intervene. He asks whether Sung-ha could still act freely if his successor position were secured, and Sung-ha answers yes without hesitation. That is enough for Sehun to commit himself. Using a bonded material that resonates with both fire and dark mana, he declares that the first step is to change Songha's weapon itself. He brings Songha into Akarkuf's private training room, a place reserved for the academy's elite, and Songha can only mutter at the display of status. Sehun accesses the room's system and starts modifying the weapon settings. The weapon skin shifts to the style of the flame flower gate, making Songha stare at the emblem of home. Sehun casually says his master sent him that design, pretending it means little while gauging Songha's reaction. Then he moves on and starts forging the actual training tools. He uses the bonded stone as the core material because its dual resonance matches Songha's internal mana. A pair of altered spears is completed for the new method. Songha is unsettled by the idea of handling 2 spears at once, but Sehun insists the paired setup suits 2 mana attributes far better than a single weapon. He instructs Songha to form a flame wheel with his left hand and release dark mana with his right. Songha accepts the instruction and focuses. He begins moving with the twin spears, trying to split his control between the 2 forces. A sudden interference in the flow makes him falter. Sehun explains that Songha unconsciously let dark mana leak into the hand meant only for the flame wheel. He clarifies that mixed attributes naturally interfere with each other, and Songha's problem is worse because he has spent years suppressing his dark mana instead of learning to wield it. If he can grow used to handling both at once, Sehun says, reaching the 6th wheel should come quickly, and he fastens a training bracelet onto Songha as part of the regimen. Songha recognizes that Sehun has given him something genuinely valuable. After 3 hours of relentless practice, Songha is still drilling the new method. He starts adapting his movements to the dual attribute style. Watching him improve, Sehun wonders whether this rapid progress comes from training methods inherited from his own future self, and decides to test just how capable that past self really was. He studies Songha's breathing, muscle movement, and shifting balance in minute detail. He also tracks the exact wavelength of mana circulating through Songha's body and leaving through the spear tip. When Songha catches him staring, Sehun brushes it off as data collection. He says he needs that data to forge the weapon Songha will eventually use. Then he downplays it as nothing more than a class assignment, and Songha scoffs at the idea that a first year could make anything worth expecting. Sehun lets the insult pass and asks a more personal question instead. He wants to know why Songha is so determined to cling to his successor position. After a long silence, Songha admits that his master wants him to become the sect leader. He explains that he simply follows that wish, and Sehun recalls that the man who raised him was not only his adoptive father but also the first sect leader and an S-class hero. That memory fixes the face of the man whose approval still rules Songha's life. Sehun realizes that even after losing his former power to injury, that master still holds absolute authority over Songha as both father and teacher. The insight deepens their connection, and Sehun notes the bond rising as he imagines the simple future Songha once wanted with his family. Songha, now openly suspicious, asks why Sehun is helping him at all. Sehun only answers with a knowing smile, keeping his real motive hidden. Beyond their immediate struggle, the story points toward the 6 great demon realms, lands swallowed by the swamp of pandemonium and overrun with demonic beasts. The protagonist declares that he intends to enter every demon realm, and to do that he needs protectors and the materials to arm them. He bluntly sizes up Yom Songha as a likely future leader of the Flame Flower Gate with enough skill and money to be useful. When Songha calls him shamelessly transactional, the protagonist makes clear he has no reason to offer help for free. Songha realizes the offer is being framed as a deal in which any aid must be paid back. The protagonist names his price. Songha must become sect leader of the Flame Flower Gate. In return, Songha promises that if he gains that position, he will follow the protagonist into the 6 great demon realms. The protagonist raises the stakes further by demanding to be forged into a weapon, promising he will personally kill demon gods for Songha. Rather than recoil, the protagonist is pleased that the negotiation has landed. Songha produces a red resonant black stone and asks one last time whether the protagonist will regret this bargain. The protagonist accepts without hesitation, forcing the bond to activate and tying Songha to his rise whether he likes it or not. Later, the scene shifts to the public training hall on Flavium's first floor. There, Flame Flower Gate instructor Gang Hyanon arrives with disciples and greets Songha as the young master. Gang explains that the accompanying disciples were chosen by the sect leader to watch a spar between him and Songha and broaden their horizons. He deliberately flatters Songha as the obvious standout beneath the next sect leader, baiting him in front of witnesses. Songha immediately shuts that down, warning him not to speak as if the succession has already been decided, and Gang retreats behind a fake apology. When Gang suggests proceeding with a routine skill assessment, Songha refuses. Instead, he shocks everyone by formally requesting promotion to the 7th wheel, provoking contempt from those who see him as a training fool reaching above his station. Behind the scenes, Gang is backed by orders to crush Songha decisively if he makes this challenge, with promises that any fallout will be covered. Gang tries to dissuade him by reminding him that 7th wheel promotion includes sparring an instructor and invoking the elder at the main gate. Songha cuts through the stalling and accuses Gang of fearing he might lose his instructor post, forcing the match to happen. Gang lays out the rules of a domain sparring match. The stronger flame wheel wins, and Songha only needs a victory or draw to be promoted. With the terms settled, the duel begins immediately. Gang mocks Songha's choice of dual short spears as crude and beneath him. Songha answers by unleashing his flames at once, catching Gang off guard with the speed and force of his opening. Gang scolds him for letting dark attribute mana mix into his flames, claiming such disorder cannot count as a proper flame will. Songha ignores the lecture and calmly insists the real answer will come when their powers collide. Gang retaliates with a sweeping spear technique, convinced Songha will regret provoking him. His flaming assault crashes down with enough force to shake the arena. Songha stands his ground inside the blaze instead of being overwhelmed. The clash erupts into a violent burst of fire and pressure. Gang suddenly senses something is wrong as the exchange stops behaving like an ordinary contest of flame wheels. To his horror, Songha's power does not merely resist his flame wheel but tears into it and devours it from within. Before Gang can recover, cracks race through his spear. The weapon shatters under the strain of the collision. Gang drops to his knees in the center of the arena, defeated and disarmed in front of his own disciples. Songha stands over him with both spears intact, throwing Gang's earlier insult back at him. With the promotion effectively won, the protagonist asks what this result means for Songha's future. Songha explains that becoming sect leader requires two things, and promotion alone is only the first step. First, one must reach the 8th wheel, and second, one must secure the consent of most of the instructors. He is confident he can win that consent through further sparring, though later matches will not be as easy as today's domain duel. When the protagonist notes how casually he says that, Songha points to today's result as proof that the path is already opening. The protagonist reminds him that every favor has a price and that Songha should start thinking about repayment now. Songha accepts the debt and asks what kind of payment the protagonist wants, offering money or materials within his means. The protagonist immediately adds that he already has another commission in mind. Songha studies the newly made spears and judges them impressive, especially considering they were produced in only a few hours from a borrowed class assignment. That performance makes him curious about what the protagonist could create with proper time and purpose. The protagonist asks for a more practical weapon, while Songha nearly pokes him with a spear in his eagerness. Their transaction deepens the system bond, raising Songha's bond level and confirming that completed deals strengthen their relationship. The story then moves to the Academy auction house, where a large crowd has gathered. An announcer opens the refining department's second-year regular auction. The protagonist notices the turnout is unusually large and realizes his status as department valedictorian has drawn attention. He also recognizes that being watched so publicly makes it harder for his enemies to target him openly. As he watches, he wonders what scheme Michael has prepared to seize control of the refining department, while the auction introduces a special quality verification process for iron swords. The organizers reveal Seojempo cloth, woven from the melted fur of an S-class white tiger, a material that is soft like fabric but resists slashing like metal. They explain that this cloth can expose blades that chase cutting power by sacrificing durability. A demonstration sword is struck against the cloth and breaks apart on contact. The announcer makes the point explicit. The cloth will be used to weed out defective swords during the auction. The first featured item is Joseph's blue-horned sword. The protagonist and Erica immediately recognize that the organizers came prepared for a trap and ask why this test matters so much. He explains that the white tiger's fur copies the sharpness of any metal weapon that touches it, so even a good blade loses durability against it. Erica realizes that this puts the white light longsword at a disadvantage, since blades optimized for cutting are usually fragile. The protagonist agrees and sees the setup for what it is, an attempt to embarrass both him and Professor Kim In-cheol by making his sword fail publicly. He remains calm, convinced that only a poorly made sword would be ruined by this test, while another item sells in the background. At last the auction reaches sword number 36, Lee Se-hun's white light longsword, and its quality verification begins. The sword flashes with white power as it meets the test. Instead of breaking, the blade begins to react in a way no one expected. The tester recoils as the sword remains whole and active after the strike. He realizes something extraordinary just happened but cannot yet understand it. The longsword hums with a strange white resonance that leaves the audience baffled. Seeing the confusion, the protagonist rises from his seat to intervene. He asks for a moment to explain, and the hall is stunned to see Lee Se-hun himself step onto the stage. He begins by saying that a blade relying only on a keen edge should indeed shatter against this kind of cloth under normal circumstances. Then he reveals the hidden principle of his weapon. The white radiance longsword draws mana from the air and condenses it into a razor-thin secondary edge. The crowd struggles to believe him because most of them cannot sense any mana at all from the blade. He tells them that is normal, because the effect is too subtle for most people to perceive directly. Though the mana density is too low to count as a true sword chi, he explains that it is still far sharper than ordinary light, which is why he calls it a keen edge. Erica connects the earlier resonance to this hidden edge and realizes that was the source of the strange reaction. The protagonist confirms it and explains that when two identical keen edges meet, they resonate instead of canceling out. Using that resonance, he performs a new trick and identifies Erica's social connection stone as the right material to tune chaotic mana arrays. He activates Erica's affinity inscription through the sword, using it as a tool to stabilize and reorganize the blade's internal mana. As the inscription takes hold, the chaotic mana inside the weapon begins to settle into order. He decides all that remains is to give the stabilized mana a single, clean route to follow. He presses the blade into the cloth again, guiding the reorganized power through it. This time the sword slices cleanly through the supposedly punishing material in a brilliant arc. The system recognizes the transformation and upgrades the White Radiance longsword from high rank to rare, granting it a new enhancement skill. The protagonist reflects that an ordinary whetstone could never have set the edge properly, and that this breakthrough officially pushed the weapon into a new tier. He immediately asks the auction staff to adjust the starting price to match the sword's new value. The bid is raised from 1 million to 5 million won, and the audience is reminded that this is now a rare rank weapon forged by the Academy's most talked about student. Its status as a rare masterpiece draws instant attention from serious buyers. Bidding explodes as collectors and researchers compete, driving the price from 10 million to 100 million in moments. Michael, desperate not to lose face, jumps in with a bid of 200 million won. Erica calmly answers with 210 million, forcing him to keep chasing her. The auctioneer fans the rivalry, urging the bidders not to leave empty-handed. The duel of wallets escalates again, and the protagonist is left staring at how casually the elite throw around sums beyond his imagination. Then a new bidder enters with an overwhelming offer of 600 million won. Even Michael is shaken by how absurdly high that number is, while a woman behind him makes clear he is expected to secure Lee Se-hoon's work at any cost. The true heavyweight reveals herself, and both Michael and Erica realize a far bigger player has entered the contest. Michael can only despair, knowing his sister will blame him for being outclassed so completely. The auction staff can barely process what is happening to the White Radiance longsword. With no higher bid, the sword is sold for 600 million won. Professor Kim In-cheol is left silently stunned by the scale of the result. The protagonist can only call the outcome unbelievable. When he checks his phone, the transfer confirms that the money has truly arrived. The buyer soon appears in person, and he confirms to the red-haired woman that the full payment was received. She asks how he plans to use the White Radiance longsword, and he says he intends to take it into a danger zone when he has time. She objects that such a valuable weapon should not be wasted on ordinary training. Instead, she proposes that he test it at Mount Yunwal, a candidate site for the first year's initial subjugation drill. He agrees that a scouting trip there would be useful, though she hesitates because her current position makes joining him difficult. She worries that openly accompanying him could be politically awkward. To solve that, he offers to craft any armament she wants in exchange, effectively buying her cooperation and time. He accepts the arrangement at once, though privately he treats the scouting trip as a convenient excuse for another goal. That hidden goal is tied to Jürgen Kruger, the world-dominating necromancer known as the Climber. The protagonist recalls that one of Kruger's lost artifacts vanished during the Pandemonium ambush. He knows that artifact is hidden deep within Mount Yunwal. Elsewhere, Michael reports this failure to a woman seated above him in authority. Arya coolly states the obvious: he failed to bring her the sword. Michael apologizes, but she dismisses regret and demands that he focus on the next move. She reminds him that he shares a class with Lee Se-hoon and orders him to exploit that opening. If he handles this properly, she may speak to their father again about the succession ceremony. She warns that if he does nothing, he will soon lose his top standing anyway. Michael realizes she has already seen through his precarious position. Though their father forbade certain actions until graduation, Arya makes clear she understands the pressure he is under. Michael vows that by any means necessary he will bring her Lee Se-hoon's sword. Arya mocks his lack of manners even while accepting his submission. She gives the order plainly: bring the sword to her. And she makes clear that she expects him to succeed no matter the cost. Afterward, the protagonist vents that Lee Se-hoon is a terrible person to deal with, while Arya watches him leave from a distance. Yet beneath her irritation, Arya admits to herself that there is something about him she finds strangely aggravating and compelling. Back in class, the protagonist presents the completed commission to Song-ha and his instructor. The finished pair consists of Crimson 1 Spear, which stores fire mana and boosts flame wheel efficiency, and Black 10 Spear, which stores dark mana and stabilizes the flame wheel. The instructor is impressed by the craftsmanship before even considering the function. What truly amazes him is the internal design. The flame wheel and auxiliary formulas are built to repel attribute mana when the user operates them incorrectly, effectively warning the wielder. He judges the pair so valuable that they can serve as both training tools and instructional texts. On that basis, he awards the protagonist a perfect score and exempts him from further attendance. Other students grumble that someone at his level might as well graduate immediately, and resent being stuck in the same class as him. As the protagonist prepares to leave, the instructor tells him to take the spears and sell them later if he wants. Walking away with the weapons, he remembers that today he still has Ma Guangsu's class. When he arrives, he finds Michael already there, practicing alone and clearly waiting for him. Michael awkwardly asks whether the protagonist also has class now, pretending he merely came early to train. The protagonist offers to leave the room to him, but Michael hurriedly stops him. Michael forces a smile and asks for a favor before the protagonist can walk away. The protagonist rejects the request immediately, refusing even to entertain it. He bluntly states that Michael was obviously sent by his sister to obtain a weapon, and that he has no intention of helping. Michael realizes he cannot let Arya lose interest in him the way another woman already has, because his current skills are too poor to impress her on their own. Desperate, he changes tactics and offers something else instead. He reveals a hero-grade weapon, the Hammer of Black Flames, a refining dragonite hammer coated in both fire and dark mana and suited for attribute training. The protagonist admits it is a solid item with plenty of room to improve, which means it has real value to him. Michael immediately proposes a wager, one more spar, with the hammer as his stake, and if the protagonist loses he must forge a weapon for Arya. The protagonist pauses, clearly weighing the offer rather than dismissing it outright. Then he smiles and agrees to the gamble on one additional condition. Lee Se-hun provokes Jake Myers into a duel by betting that if he wins, Jake has to stop bringing up his sister for a month and make sure she knows it. Jake reluctantly accepts, while Se-hun reminds himself that he lost their last exchange by letting an unexpected counterattack slip through. Jake decides he will not hold back this time and plans to unleash his full power from the opening move. As Jake compresses a startling amount of mana with a clenched fist, onlookers realize he had always been strong enough to interfere with top fighters before. Se-hun calmly crushes a stone-like bond in his hand to switch preparations. He deactivates Erika's social link stone, activates Ryu Eunha's gluttony iron, and uses the former effect to tune his body's mana into its best state. With his grip set, Se-hun readies both spears for a serious fight. Jake notices that Se-hun handles a short spear naturally, suggesting real familiarity rather than improvisation. That makes Jake wonder whether Se-hun's blacksmith background also means he can wield many kinds of weapons. Even so, Jake refuses to believe mere familiarity with a weapon will be enough to beat him. He launches in with overwhelming force to prove he is not someone Se-hun can simply overpower. Se-hun answers the charge by shaping his body and timing around Jake's movement instead of meeting it head-on. Jake becomes convinced the match is already his as he closes in with confidence. Se-hun abruptly changes the rhythm by igniting a fire-based technique. His twin spears carve a flaming wheel that forces Jake onto the defensive and breaks the momentum of the assault. Jake is caught off guard when the exchange turns against him. Se-hun reveals the technique as Flame Wheel Ember Spear, drawing on knowledge he learned before his regression. He recalls that Samjayan once told him many stories and initially shared techniques only to raise their bond level. Later, once Samjayan truly trusted him, they passed on secret methods they had never taught anyone else. Remembering how he was mocked as talentless back then, Se-hun decides that even an imperfect imitation of those teachings will do for now. He channels fire through the spear in a rough but usable copy of the original art. The flaming arcs keep Jake pinned down and dragged along Se-hun's pace. Jake realizes he has been controlled ever since he lost the flow of the fight. He also realizes Se-hun's current physical edge is coming from a temporary skill rather than his natural body. Jake decides his best chance is to stall until that skill wears off and then reverse the match. He immediately starts retreating and buying time instead of forcing another clash. Se-hun sees through the tactic at once and admits Jake's instincts are worthy of the Academy's top student. To stop the stalling, Se-hun triggers Explosive Ring by using mana stored in Yom Songha's Ink Spider Bracelet. Jake is horrified because Se-hun is mixing stored fire attribute mana into the fight in a way that looks dangerously reckless. With no choice, Jake hurriedly gathers mana between his palms to answer the threat. He compresses that mana into a blade-like form with his bare hands. Jake unveils Myers-style Formless Sword, a sword art executed without holding an actual weapon. He follows it with blue axis light thread, sending a cutting blue trajectory through the air. The strike tears upward and forces Se-hun to evade rather than continue pressing. Se-hun is impressed that Jake can use sword arts empty-handed and acknowledges the quality of the response. Jake decides admiration is over and escalates to a deadlier revision of Flame Wheel Ember Spear. He unleashes Eclipse Crescent because he cannot afford to lose, even if it means using a near-fatal move. The Red Crescent and Jake's blue sword art collide in a violent explosion of opposing mana. The impact floods the hall with blinding light and shockwaves. When the glare clears, Se-hun is still composed, his fist raised amid blue mana. Jake braces for the outcome, unsure whether he has survived the exchange cleanly. Se-hun's mana settles as the dust begins to clear around him. Se-hun admits defeat at the same moment the system announces that he has established a bond with Jake Myers. He questions whether the result should really count as a loss rather than a draw. Jake concedes it could be called a tie, but since he had to use a near-fatal technique, he feels the exchange was effectively his own loss. That frustration makes Jake reveal his deeper problem. He wishes he could use a real sword. When Se-hun asks why he cannot, Jake explains that any sword he holds breaks too easily. He has even shattered a hero-grade blade before, which leaves Se-hun puzzled. Se-hun suddenly thinks he understands the cause and asks Jake to hold out his right hand. He tells Jake to relax his hand and keep his mana perfectly still so he will not get hurt. Jake grows alarmed when Se-hun raises a hammer over that hand without explaining himself. Se-hun strikes Jake's palm directly with the hammer. From the reaction, Se-hun confirms his suspicion. He concludes that Jake's mana changes the material itself rather than merely reinforcing it, which explains why swords fail in his grip. Jake demands an explanation for the bizarre test. Se-hun bluntly asks whether Jake wants him to make a sword. The system extracts Jake's bond and produces Jake Myers' Compression Stone, a superior ore that endlessly compresses absorbed mana until it exceeds its durability and breaks. Sehun promises he can forge Jake a sword that Jake himself will not be able to break. Before they can continue, Sehun senses a new presence approaching. A new bond forms with Ma Guangsu as the stern instructor enters the hall. Ma Guangsu dismisses Jake and summons Sehun for a private talk. Jake is left outside, confused but obedient. Alone with Sehun, Ma Guangsu points out the contradiction between Sehun's old blacksmith identity and his current mastery as a spearman. He warns Sehun to answer carefully so there is no misunderstanding. Sehun deflects with dry humor, pretending the real issue is simply that his stance looked too perfect. To demonstrate, he shows a cheap trick rather than a hidden lineage. He explains that his skill works by adjusting his muscles to imitate another person's body. The effect vanishes once the skill ends, proving it is temporary mimicry rather than a permanent transformation. Ma Guangsu asks what limits this ability has. He weighs the implications of a power based on observation and imitation. After hearing the explanation, Ma Guangsu apologizes for suspecting Sehun and admits he overreacted because a demon with a similar ability exists. He identifies that demon as one of the 10 evils of the pandemonium, the doppelganger, a killer who copies martial arts and uses them to erase heroic legacies. Ma Guangsu's hatred runs especially deep because of a past encounter with that monster. Sehun realizes their new bond likely formed because that old grudge made Ma Guangsu immediately sensitive to his skill. He concludes that the instructor either suspected him of being the doppelganger or decided he could be useful in hunting it. Since either way Ma Guangsu judged him worth keeping close, Sehun accepts the situation. Ma Guangsu relaxes and says he would have reacted the same way in Sehun's place. He laughs that modern heroes are too ignorant about demons to recognize such dangers quickly. Then he says Sehun's talent is so exceptional that it may force him to rethink how he teaches. As Sehun listens, he wonders how someone who claims to come from a poor background can speak as if valedictorian status at a Kharkov is easily within reach. Ma Guangsu studies him with growing curiosity. By the time Sehun leaves, the instructor has already decided the boy will be interesting to investigate further. Later, Sehun calls Yom Songha to ask whether she has chosen what she wants in return for his help. She says she feels uneasy staying indebted to him, and Sehun remarks that she must be exhausting to deal with. After a pause, he asks whether she knows a Babel mage named Louise Valent. Yom Songha says she does not, but agrees to quietly find out where Louise is and what she is doing. When she questions whether he even has the connections to ask for that, she reminds him how powerless he is within the Flame Flower Gate. Sehun lets the jab pass in silence. Yom Songha insists she has other channels and tells him to trust her and wait, leaving Sehun to reflect that her people's skills are a mess too. Sehun recalls Louise Valent as the explosive dog, a figure who was obscure in the past but destined to become a dangerous time bomb. He remembers hearing that her personality only turned vicious after her injury, which means reaching her before that point might change everything. His thoughts are interrupted when Yom Songha reports that Louise has already been found. The information reveals Louise as the second-year salutatorian of the Elemental Department, and once a highly promising cadet. Half a year earlier, her wand exploded during a spar, permanently damaging her mana circuit and forcing her onto medical leave. That confirms to Sehun that he has arrived at exactly the right moment to intervene. Yom Songha adds that Louise is undergoing rehabilitation at UR's General Hospital with no sign of improvement, and sends the full details. Jake suddenly reappears before Sehun can leave. He says he still wants to talk about the promised sword, but Sehun cuts him off. Instead, Sehun shows him the report on Louise's accident and asks whether he knows the 2 students tied to it. Jake recognizes that Gotz Kruger and Pierre Barmet are related by marriage and both belong to the Noblesse network. Sehun offers a deal. If Jake investigates them for him, he will forge the sword within a week. Jake eagerly agrees to do anything if Sehun can really deliver. Sehun's first request is absurdly simple and brutal. Jake must break his arm. He specifies that it should be done as cleanly as possible. The story shifts to UR's General Hospital, where Louise is being treated. Doctors and staff watch tensely as another rehabilitation attempt begins. Louise steadies herself and tries to suppress her fear before starting. She forces herself into the exercise again, determined to prove she can still use magic. She casts Lava Bullet despite her damaged condition. The spell immediately backfires into her body instead of flowing outward. Louise collapses in pain as the attempt fails again. The staff confirm mana backflow and begin emergency mana freeze procedures. The failure triggers traumatic memories of the day her wand exploded during that disastrous spar. The supervising doctor halts the experiment and orders neutralizers and tranquilizers at once. Louise insists she is fine and begs for only a short break so the experiment can continue. The doctor refuses, ends the session, and cuts her rehabilitation attempts down to 50 a day. To Louise, being reduced to beginner-level magic is a humiliation she can barely accept. She tries to protest and keep going anyway. Even while being restrained, she desperately insists she can still do it if given one more chance. The staff warn her to stop drawing out mana, but she keeps shouting that she can succeed. Her desperation turns violent as she lashes out in denial. A tranquilizer finally drops her before she can hurt herself or anyone else. The room falls quiet except for the open window and the fading aftermath of the struggle. When Louise wakes later, Her fury has cooled into a flat, exhausted stare. Alone in bed, she bitterly curses herself for ruining her chance in a moment of panic. She admits she was too desperate and acted like an idiot. Instead of wallowing, she decides she needs another path if rehabilitation will not restore her. She thinks she should calm herself with exercise or meditation before trying anything else. As she gets up, someone crashes into her. Annoyed and nursing a bloody nose, she curses the careless stranger. The stranger is Sehun, now dressed like a patient, staring at her with open interest. At that moment, an air raid alert blares through the building, ordering everyone to evacuate. The alarm reminds Sehun of the catastrophic attack from his previous life. He remembers that he nearly died in that disaster. He also remembers vowing never to deal with the people behind that attack again. Outside, a masked woman floats above the city amid smoke and destruction, signaling the scale of the threat. Her presence confirms that the attack is already underway. Sehun wonders whether this woman is the mastermind and judges her to be at least A-class. Then he notices Louise beside him in the present, and realizes the timing of their meeting is no coincidence. Louise, still masked in his memory and sharp-eyed in reality, snaps at him for staring. Back in the hospital corridor, she repeats the demand, confused by his silence. Still angry from the collision, she insults him and says the least he could do is apologize. But the moment stretches as she senses something strange in his reaction. Her body gives out, and she drops to one knee before she can keep posturing. Sehun tells her that if she is sick, she should stop wandering and lie down quietly. He offers to help her back to her room or call a nurse if she prefers. Louise refuses because being caught outside her room would ruin whatever she is trying to do, and she bitterly thinks that in her healthy days a man like him would have been nothing. Even so, she has no choice but to lean on him. Once she is seated again, Sehun asks what she needs. Louise directs him to the top drawer, where a black case is hidden. A guarded girl in a hospital bed reluctantly accepts a small black box from the injured young man who saved her. He insists he will leave once she recovers and tells her to use what he brought, while she pushes him away for prying into a stranger's business. She tries the inhaler anyway, hoping for relief. The young man suddenly realizes something is wrong. He stops her and bluntly warns that the device is harming her instead of treating her. When she dismisses him, he presses the point and identifies the inhaler itself as the problem. He reveals that the inhaler is worsening the damage in her throat. That diagnosis shocks her badly enough to break through her hostility. She demands he repeat himself, no longer able to ignore what he claims to know. He calmly confirms that he meant exactly what he said. Before the confrontation can go further, a hospital announcement summons Cadet Lee Sehun to the nursing station. He prepares to leave, and she realizes the summoned cadet is him. After confirming his name, he warns her one last time that using the inhaler could leave her magically crippled. She rejects both his warning and his status, lashing out at him as a lowly blacksmith and ordering him out. He leaves without arguing further. Alone again, she curses the blacksmith she despises, but his words clearly linger. On his way out, Sehun receives a system notice that he has successfully formed a bond with Louise Valent. The unexpected bond startles him, but he keeps his composure in front of the doctor. The doctor assures him his broken arm will heal quickly and that his muscles and mana circuits were not damaged. Even so, the doctor orders him to remain in Ascus for another week, which Sehun accepts as useful time. He decides to use that week to get closer to Louise and reduce the damage to her mana circuits. More urgently, he resolves to deal with the dangerous inhaler he now calls the mana eroder. He asks the doctor about Louise and learns she is one of the doctor's current patients. Sehun reports that she nearly collapsed while trying to use magic and frames it as a serious medical risk. Although she asked him to keep quiet, he chooses to tell the doctor anyway because the danger outweighs her wishes. The doctor accepts the report and dismisses him, while Sehun privately notes that this is exactly what he wanted. The next morning, the hospital room is quiet again. Sehun places a call to Jake to investigate Louise's past. Once Jake answers, Sehun immediately asks for the information he requested. Jake says the old incident around Louise looks suspicious and begins by bringing up Babel's Ivory Tower. He explains that the Ivory Tower is UR's powerful scholarship foundation, independent from Babel but deeply influential over cadets. Jake adds that Gitz Kruger had been aiming for an Ivory Tower scholarship when the incident happened. Louise had been considered his strongest rival for that scholarship. Right before the deciding sparring match, the weapon supplied to Louise exploded, and Gitz ended up taking the scholarship, while his family and the Barmett family benefited from their ties. From the pattern, Sehun concludes that Gitz and Pierre Barmett likely worked together to target Louise, and he starts wondering how the inhaler fits into it. Jake asks whether anything else about Louise's situation seemed strange. He mentions that Professor Charles from the Elemental Department personally stepped in to help Louise after her severe injuries and has continued supporting her ever since. That sounds benevolent on the surface, but Sehun feels there is something off about it. As he tries to end the call, Jake hurriedly asks a favor on behalf of worried acquaintances. Jake begs him to reassure Yom Songha and Erica that he is fine, since they have been taking their worry out on him. Sehun sends a brief warning to Songha not to go near Jake, clearly unconvinced by her obedient reply. He realizes he does not even have Erica's number. Deciding Erica is less likely to cause trouble, he postpones contacting her and heads to Louise's room instead. At her door, he introduces himself as the person who helped her the day before. She answers by yanking him inside before he can finish. Louise slams him against the wall in a burst of pent-up anger. She recognizes him instantly, and can barely contain her fury. Her outburst is so violent it seems to shake the whole building. She demands to know why he is acting offended when his meddling has ruined her life. She reveals that after his report, the doctor halted her rehabilitation experiment and ordered 2 weeks of total rest with the treatment reset to the beginning. To her, that means half a year of painful effort has been thrown away because of him. When he asks about the inhaler, she snaps that she never used it again after hearing his warning, but blames some unknown man for putting her in this position at all. His promise that he can fix her mana burns catches her off guard despite herself. She immediately counters that mana burns are considered incurable, beyond even the greatest experts for now. Still, curiosity wins out, and she challenges him to explain himself. He accepts and begins laying out what he knows. He first asks where she got the inhaler, and she admits a professor she knows gave it to her. Sehun names the device the mana eroder and makes clear he sees it as something deliberately dangerous. Louise, unfamiliar with that name, demands an explanation. He compares her condition to a circuit whose damaged section has been forced to handle far more power than it was built for. The analogy immediately unsettles her because it matches her symptoms too well. He pinpoints the damage to the mana circuits in her neck and explains that only that section has been dangerously altered. The resulting conflict causes overloads until the damaged circuits can no longer handle mana at all. The possibility of losing magic completely horrifies her. She remembers being told the inhaler would help her wound, and the betrayal becomes painfully clear. In her memory, she had gratefully accepted help from an older mentor figure. That man had addressed her gently and personally, earning her trust. He promised she could overcome her mana burns if she endured the pain and refused to give up. Back then, she chose to believe him. Now she realizes she had been manipulated. The realization hardens into a vow to make the man responsible pay. Sehun approves of the anger because it means she has finally stopped acting defeated, though he admits he cannot directly repair her damaged circuits. What he can do, he says, is recalibrate how she uses mana so she can cast magic again. Louise immediately asks what he wants in return, refusing to believe anyone would help her for free. He claims his request is simple. He wants her help exploring the 6 great demon realms in the future. He gives her a stark choice between trusting him to change her future or surrendering to her current fate. She thinks it over instead of rejecting him outright. At last she offers her hand and agrees, warning him not to betray his word. He shakes on it and teases her, and the hostility between them shifts into a rough partnership. He immediately produces a bag and announces the first day's training tools. Louise is baffled to discover the tools are just cherries. Sehun starts by asking what kind of mana hurts her when it passes through the damaged circuits in her neck. He explains that ordinary ambient mana causes no pain, but refined mana used for actual spellcasting does. His solution is bizarre but direct. She must learn to refine mana with her tongue instead of forcing it through the ruined circuits in her throat. Louise is stunned by how absurd the idea sounds. He admits it would be impossible for most people, but he insists she is the exception who can make it work. He reveals that in the future she became famous as Explosive Dog by using this very method. That future reputation convinces her just enough to hear him out and ask what to do first. He begins by training the mana circuits inside her mouth. To demonstrate, he shows her the simplest basic form. He explains that she must delicately manipulate the circuits on her tongue and even use her teeth to assist at first, which makes her suspect he is a genius or a lunatic. As he keeps elaborating on strange mouth-based techniques, she leans harder toward lunatic. Her patience finally snaps and she screams at him for making her do insane things. He turns even that into training, telling her to shout while infusing mana and emotion. The next exercise is even stranger, forcing her to pronounce 2 difficult sentences at once until hospital staff start noticing. He keeps pushing the same simultaneous pronunciation drill while she threatens him through clenched teeth. A week later, Louise proudly announces that she has finally succeeded. Sehun praises her progress, and she boasts that this level of training was never going to stop her. He privately notes how quickly she adapts, likely because the method was originally hers, just as she erupts in frustration that none of this seems connected to actual mana control. She complains that all she has improved is her voice and pronunciation. After venting, she sheepishly apologizes for yelling and admits she felt everything had been pointless. Sehun simply tells her to continue, because the real lesson is only now beginning. He explains that the training has been preparing her to refine the mana used for incantation magic. When she reacts in surprise, he tells her to watch carefully and demonstrates. He teaches that incantation magic requires a minimum mana core and a strong will to manifest it. He calls that decisive inner picture the mental image. The clearer the image, the stronger the spell. Using only words and will, he forms a sphere of magic in the room. He then reshapes it into a form better suited for firing. The spell transforms and gains elemental infusion. He pushes it further by increasing its speed and penetrating power. With a final command, he accelerates the projectile. The blast tears through the room and out the window while Louise ducks in shock. Outside, the spell detonates in the sky. Only then does Sehun realize he got carried away and shattered the hospital window. He hurriedly apologizes and promises to pay for the damage. When Louise just stares, he awkwardly asks if she is angry. Instead of anger, she immediately recreates the sphere after seeing it only once. Sehun is genuinely impressed by how perfectly she copies the technique on her first try. Though her version is smaller, she instinctively uses it to rebuild the broken window, proving her control is already exceptional. Sehun reminds her that magic can ignore the ordinary laws of the world. He adds that a word backed by a strong mental image can even overturn the usual laws of magic itself. Overwhelmed by finally touching magic again, Louise refuses to cry yet because her revenge still matters more. She fixes her hatred on the 3 people she believes destroyed her life, and vows not to break until she tears out the throat of the one who ruined hers. Seeing that resolve, Sehun decides she is ready for the next stage of his plan. When she asks what that means, he shows her on his phone. He has already registered her for trauma recovery in the most direct way possible. That recovery begins at the Ivory Tower mock training ground. There, a skeleton he summoned is overwhelming several cadets, causing chaos and drawing attention. The cadets cannot believe a mere skeleton is beating them so badly. Watching from above, Getz Kruger is unimpressed and dismissive of the freshmen. He complains that none of the new students are worth anything. Then he notices his phone vibrating with a new message. He orders the battered cadets, and even the skeleton, to clear out so he can focus on it. Another student asks what is happening as the scene empties. Getz receives word that a challenge has been posted on the tower bulletin board. He opens the post and is told the situation has become troublesome. The moment he sees who posted it, his temper explodes. The challenge identifies Louise Valent and makes it unmistakably clear that she is addressing him personally and contemptuously. In the post, Louise declares that after long rehabilitation she can use magic again and now wants to settle the debt from 6 months ago by dueling Getz Kruger. She sets the duel for 1 week later at the martial arts hall and taunts him with false politeness about refusing if he is afraid. The insult lands exactly as intended, and Getz crushes his phone in rage. Humiliated, he swears that whatever her recovery, he will destroy her so thoroughly she will never stand again. Back at the hospital, Louise calls Sehun insane for provoking someone so dangerous. He shrugs it off, arguing that he did not send an outright death threat. She protests that challenging Getz to a duel makes no sense when her word magic is still only at a beginner level. Sehun tells her to stop panicking because he posted the challenge with a plan, not recklessness. He explains that word magic depends more on will and subconscious instinct than precise calculations, and that her real obstacle is the fear left by the incident that crippled her. So he tells Louise the duel is not just revenge but the trial she needs to overcome her trauma, and asks her to endure a little longer. While recovering, Louise worries that losing again will only deepen the trauma she already carries. Lee Se-hoon immediately rejects that fear and refuses to let her surrender to it. He reassures her that she will not lose to her rival, and as Louise accepts him, a bond forms between them. Louise reveals she has already prepared a supreme-grade waterstone that can greatly specialize mana in his equipment. The quality of the material leaves her briefly stunned. After steadying herself, she asks what kind of training comes next. Se-hoon answers that the next step is not practice, but a test. He makes the answer deliberately dramatic, heightening her confusion. Then he clarifies that the test will be an oral exam, which catches her completely off guard. As the absurdity sinks in, Se-hoon starts connecting Louise's accident to something much larger. He points out how suspicious it is that a sponsored weapon exploded right before the scholarship exam. He argues that the Barmits and their partners, the Krugers, likely conspired because Louise would have won the scholarship otherwise. From elsewhere, someone hearing this line of thought dismisses the culprits as pathetic. Pierre Barmit is harshly scolded by his older brother for failing to deal with Louise quietly and turning it into a scandal. Pierre can only apologize and admit he has caused trouble for the family. His brother orders him to clean up the mess himself, and warns that involving the family further will only worsen their position. Left alone, Pierre bitterly realizes his brothers would gladly let him fall if it meant dividing the family empire without him. Furious and cornered, Pierre is interrupted by the arrival of Getz. Getz greets him with mocking familiarity, making it clear he has come to exploit Pierre's desperation. Pierre immediately suspects Getz might expose their role in the attempt to eliminate Louise months earlier. When Getz stays silent, Pierre lashes out and demands he stop toying with him. Getz reminds him that imprisoning and expelling Louise would have been enough, and that Pierre was the one who escalated the plan. Pierre accepts the blame, but Getz cuts off the apology and demands a real solution. He raises the stakes by warning Pierre that his own succession rights could disappear as well. Only after tightening that pressure does Getz reveal he already has a plan. His solution is not damage control, but a final move to erase the problem completely. Back in the hospital, Se-hoon studies Louise's bond stone and realizes it has changed from the form he remembers. As he channels mana through it, he concludes the material is finally adapting to him instead of resisting him. The stone even reshapes more naturally than expected, making him wonder if this was its true form all along. He becomes convinced he can forge a weapon for Louise that surpasses what he originally planned. When Louise approaches, he confirms this is the special material and tells her they can begin immediately. He instructs her to simply pour mana into the stone until its color stabilizes, with no refinement needed. Watching her handle it so easily, Se-hoon realizes the process is going even better than expected. He reflects that in his previous life he focused on fixing flaws, but now he can aim higher. With his body recovered and the materials ideal, he decides to design the weapon to draw out even more power. He begins by spreading mana through a projection alloy and shaping it into a thin, perfect square. At the same time, he flawlessly engraves a complex mana circuit, astonishing Louise with how naturally he handles it. Once the circuit is complete, he lifts his hand away without hesitation. Louise breaks his concentration by asking if he is finished, and he snaps back to the present. He tells her to carefully place the charged stone on top of the prepared plate. The moment she does, the stone resonates with the circuit and activates. A surge of blue mana erupts through the engraved pathways. Louise watches in awe as the process reveals a mana amplification effect. Sehun rapidly stacks multiple temporary properties into the weapon, taking advantage of a simpler method than full enchanting even though it normally fades quickly. He notes that a brine stone can preserve those imprinted properties and remove that weakness. As the forging reaches its peak, Louise realizes he has inscribed 73 separate word magic sigils. The sheer elegance of the result leaves her speechless. The mana-infused plates then assemble themselves along the circuit to complete the weapon structure. The finished weapon, Vargr, is revealed as a rare, high-quality piece made specifically for Louise and empowered by 73 sigils. Louise eagerly asks to test it, and Sehun warns her to use the weakest magic possible because she will not be able to control it yet. A doctor passes nearby just as the two prepare to try the weapon indoors. Louise's supposedly weak test blast detonates with enough force to wreck the room and send the doctor diving for cover. The doctor stares at the destroyed room in disbelief while Sehun and Louise emerge looking guilty. Louise awkwardly apologizes, while Sehun silently reminds her that even this was her holding back. A week later, at the hall where the exam will be held, students discuss whether Louise will even appear after being deliberately baited. They assume she is still too injured and weak to use magic, and start treating her absence as likely. Sehun remembers Louise telling him to stay away because his presence distracts her, but he still wants to encourage her before the exam. Before he can focus on that, he hears a strange sound that no one else seems to notice. As the sound grows louder, he realizes he may be the only one perceiving it. The resonance reminds him of the mana corruptor incident, and he immediately fears Louise is being targeted again. Following the sound, he traces it to a storage room near Louise's waiting area. He bursts the door open without hesitation. Inside, he spots the source and knows he has found what he was sensing. A mocking voice calls his obsession a pointless dream, pulling him into a familiar nightmare. Sehun recognizes the voice at once. The figure that appears is the red-haired woman he once called Master. She ridicules him for still clinging to the childish fantasy of turning back time with a worthless dagger. Even while mocking him, she admits she cannot completely prove such a reversal is impossible. She addresses him as her disciple and prepares to crush his resolve again. Her lesson is that dreams are a poisoned chalice, sweet while they last and empty once reality returns. She presses that cruelty further, insisting he has already failed and must face that truth. The illusion urges him to stop resisting and simply accept death. Sehun finally answers, saying there is one fatal flaw in the act. He declares that his real master would never waste so many words just to tell him to die. With that realization, he strikes the illusion head-on. The false master shatters like glass under the blow. Behind the broken illusion, the real target is exposed as a damaged device crackling with green energy. Sehun lifts the device with cold anger and condemns whoever dared imitate his master.